Like the chickens.
Sounds like chicken. But the job title list is not poultry at all.
Oh, excellent pun. Firstly,
Thank you so much.
huge congrats on that. That was fantastic.
The silence was all there. We went, did that work? It worked.
I kind of wanted to applaud, to be honest.
You can come again. You can come again. This is a gear change now, but the front page of the Times.
Yes, front page of the Times will tackle murder law loopholes, vow Tories. And just before anyone panics, there's not a loophole in the murder law. It's pretty clear. What they're actually aimed at is tackling sentencing and increasing sentencing for various different types of murder. Now, this sounds like a great election fair, really, but it's, for me, entirely performative, because what's being offered is discussing how judges can find different ways to take into account the aggravating and mitigating factors of a crime. And
Which they do already.
Which they do already, exactly. And the Conservatives say, well, one of the ways we might do this is adopt US-style first-degree murders for deliberate attempts to kill and second-degree murders when you're only trying to hurt the person and you end up killing them. However, this is already all taken into account in sentencing guidelines. Judges already have powers to do this. And the Times also mentions that they're going to address looking at tougher sentences for killers like Valdo Colocaine. In fact, the government appealed his sentence and argued for what would have been in practice a less tough sentence for him, because it had a better label. It was a custodial sentence, so it looked good, rather than a sentence in a secure institution. But actually, in terms of protecting the public, it's much more difficult to release someone from a secure institution, and there's far more checks and balances to protect the public than there is if you're just in prison. So they were actually arguing for something that looked better and protected the public less. And for me, that's what this whole story is. It's all about looking good and failing the public. Because if the Conservatives really wanted to address high crime rates, and we do have high crime rates, then they would address the massive backlog in the court system, which is, it's taking...
Stands at something, what, 50,000 cases or rather?
An incredible amount. It's taking over a year for many murder cases to get to trial. And just if anyone who has tried any sort of case, not just a murder case, it's so difficult to get good evidence if you're looking over a year later. So this isn't just inconvenience. This is a government failure because there's not enough courts, there's not enough judges. I've had 3 cases, 3 trials cancelled in the last 3 weeks just because we didn't have enough judges to hear the trials. So this is a practical impact that is making it much more difficult to convict criminals. So I think if the Conservatives and if Labour really want to put more criminals in jail, and I think we can probably all agree that's a good thing, then they need to look at convicting them, not just sort of performative things about sentencing.
There's also a point about jails and the fact that there is no space in them. So it's all well and good. We hear again and again from the Conservatives that we need to put more people in jail and lock people up for longer, and that all sounds great. But where are you going to put them when there is no space? And we are building jails, but we're not building them fast enough.
And the jails that do exist where there's a lack of space, generally we've talked lots about H&P Wandsworth, which isn't far down the river. They're old Victorian buildings that aren't really fit for modern use in 2024, certainly also not for the number of people who are sometimes incarcerated within them.
Absolutely. And it's, again, this comes down to, do you want to look good or do good? Because ideally, people should be coming out of jail less likely to commit crimes in future. And because there's so many multiple failings in our prison system, for many crimes, people come out of jail statistically more likely to commit another crime. And so that's saying, oh, we'll do more sentences, tougher sentences for this, tougher sentences for that, is arguably just making the problem worse, really.
It's going to be a topic that I've not heard a huge amount over the course of this kind of election 10 days, but there's scope for more.
We didn't have crime in the live debate earlier this week, for instance, and I think that was a kind of gaping hole in that debate.
Really disappointing to see them not tackle that, actually.
let's talk about Jeremy Hunt. Let's talk about centre politics.
Yes. So remember when Andy Street, the Metro Mayor for the West Mids, former Metro Mayor, talked about how we needed to, the Tory party needed to stay in the centre ground and not lurch to the right, and the elections are won in the centre. Well, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, a very, proud One Nation Tory, is saying the same thing. So he's done this interview with The Guardian, and it's really quite an interesting interview, to be honest, where he talks about, the Conservative Party is a broad church. He acknowledges it's very difficult for them to win the election in, with the state of the polls the way they are at the moment. So he's not, so he's not, at least he's not deluding himself on that. And then also, he's asked about, for instance, a threat of reform. So yesterday there was that Sky News poll that came out. It was the first poll that's come out since Nigel Farage has announced he's going to be running as a candidate in Clacton and also taking over of leading the Reform Party. And essentially what Jeremy Hunt is saying is he's kind of warning Tory MPs and, Tory colleagues not to lurch to the right in response to what we've seen from reform. So he's saying here the evidence of Britain is that elections are always won from the centre ground, and in a two-party system that will always be the case. So what he's trying to say is let's not get carried away and get bounced into lurching to the right because of reform when that's not going to be electorally beneficial.
David Cameron and Tony Blair would both surely attest that being more centrist politics on either side of the spectrum is generally a vote winner.
Well, exactly. But, some of his more right-wing colleagues will argue, well, look at the polling numbers for reform. Clearly, we are hemorrhaging voters to reform because we're not being right-wing enough on immigration. However, others would argue, well, some of those reform voters were not really your voters in the first place. They were borrowed votes for the kind of Brexit 2019 general election.
I mean, it's great to see Jeremy Hunt saying this, because I think all of us would like to see the debate more in the centre ground and dealing with real issues. But has he not been in the room for the past year in Conservative Party strategic election strategy? The entire election strategy seems to be fighting it out with reform for a sort of, maybe 10 to 15% of voters on the well to the right end of the political spectrum. And there just seems to be no interest from Conservatives from the Conservative Party for anyone in the centre, certainly no one on the centre left. And I think part of the problem that they're really having at the moment is that the electorate are punishing them by sort of saying, look, we're not that interested in what you're talking about. You're not talking about our concerns. You're talking about what are quite fringe issues. And we're not interested. So great from Jeremy Hunt. Maybe tell his boss.
I think also, if you speak to One Nation Conservatives, not MPs anymore at the moment, candidates, they say to me, actually, they're not that worried about reform. They feel that in their seats, reform, if it will take votes off them, it will also take votes off Labour. So they don't think it's going to be disastrous for them. They feel, and if you speak to, for instance, 2019 Tory, not MPs candidates, they are the ones who are worried about reform. Their margins are smaller, and a lot of them, they're MPs for places that used to be Labour that turned Tory for that vote. So those are the kinds of MPs that are getting scared. Jeremy Hunt is saying the MPs from the One Nation faction just need to everyone needs to calm down and stick to what we know, and they're more likely to keep their seats.
Because in many respects, I know this is a generalisation, reform voters are an interesting mix of very focused on immigration, but then also likely to maybe potentially side with Labour over nationalising some of the state projects, for example. And I guess, it kind of alludes to what you're saying there. Don't get too worried, because actually quite a lot of people would quite like to meet you in the middle. Let's move actually on from the right-hand side of the political spectrum to the left, and also left geographically of the United Kingdom, to Wales.
Well done.
I work hard, Murray. I work hard.
I'm going to dispute on whether it's left. As a Scot, I think Wales is actually on the right side of the
and of course,
UK.
Northern Ireland will dispute that as well. I work hard and I fail.
This is quite a blow for Labour, I think. Vaughan Gething, who's the Labour First Minister of Scotland, has lost a confidence vote in the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd. He's been having problems for quite a while, actually, and they've just sort of crested above the surface of political coverage. He is accused of taking £200,000 from a in a donation from a company that has been convicted twice of dumping waste on the Gwent Plains. And the more he was accused of this, and then just more and more came out. It turns out, just the other day, it turns out he tried to block this coming out and tried to block environmental information requests from journalists. That he lobbied for this company while he was a minister. So he faced a confidence vote in the Senate and lost, and that means nothing.
Well, it meant some tears, that much was for sure, but he says he's going to, and I'm afraid we're slightly short on time, he says he's not going to go anywhere.
He's not required to go anywhere. It's non-binding. So there's this whole political activity that has had relatively little impact on who's in government in Wales.
There needs to be a vote on the confidence in the government rather than in him.
Correct.
Sam, Mari, thank you both so much. Don't go anywhere. We're here all morning on Sky News. Do stay with us. Thanks for watching.
Morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock, 8 years since the D-Day landings that marked the start of the end of World War II. We're live in Normandy throughout the morning, where world leaders are gathering.
The Prime Minister and Labour leader will join today's events as the fallout from their tax row continues.
And we'll hear from some of the veterans who risked their lives to liberate Europe.
Thursday, the 6th of June. Commemorations are beginning this morning with reenactments of the D-Day landings on what became known as the longest day.
Sadness for those who've held, but pride for the achievements.
I'm in Vers-sur-Mer, and those who gather here in Normandy may be left wondering if the lessons of the past have been learned. War is raging once again in Europe.
Also ahead, Hamas says dozens have been killed in an airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. In politics, the Prime Minister's £2,000 Labour tax hike claim is investigated by the UK's statistics watchdog. Following the money, we reveal which constituencies are being targeted most by online political adverts.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
And which of the nation's most popular pooches have made it onto new stamps? It was on this morning, 8 years ago, that more than 150,000 Allied troops landed by air and sea on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. It was the biggest seaborne invasion in military history, one that would eventually see Europe liberated from Nazi occupation, ending World War II. Well, D-Day was a long and costly campaign, and one that remains permanently etched in the memories of those who were there, as our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
It was the day the world changed. Before dawn, on the morning of 6th of June 1944, Allied forces began the largest amphibious operation in history. D-Day, the start of the liberation of France and Western Europe, the catalyst for victory over Nazi Germany. Over 150,000 men from the Allied forces landing along the Normandy coastline. And now some of those soldiers are back, memories and emotions intact after 8 decades.
It never goes out of your mind. It's there all the time.
That's you, John.
Yeah, when I was 19.
Sadness for those who've held, but pride for the achievements of the arrangement.
It was a day that changed the world.
Changed the world, yes, that's right.
But when you were there in the middle of it,
Yeah,
did it simply feel like horror?
horror is the word.
These are the men who don't like to be called heroes, but who do inspire, even the youngest.
They've been through a tough time and they should be respected in a good way.
So many did not survive D-Day. This region is dotted with cemeteries to the fallen. Here, the graves have been lit by candles. Today they will be remembered by nations still feeling a sense of deep gratitude. President Macron will be joined by Joe Biden and other leaders as they converge to remember and give thanks, but also to wonder what lessons really have been learnt. Arlette was a 4-year-old girl on D-Day. Her home, a cafe next to Pegasus Bridge, it was the first building to be liberated, and she still runs it. She's aghast that war rages again in Europe.
Man will never learn. The war started from the Middle Ages and before. What is very sad is that the young people of today, whether they are families or the soldiers, are risking their lives again for freedom.
This is where D-Day started. Just after midnight, troops landed near here to liberate Pegasus Bridge, and people have come from all over the world to mark the occasion. But the number of veterans is falling. There'll never be another commemoration like this one. There was a sense of camaraderie here. of people who had come together in remembrance and respect. And then fireworks to mark the moment when the first troops landed. The battles and triumphs that followed still shape all of our lives. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Normandy.
Adam joining us now live. Very poignant moments already today, with more to come. Adam, good morning.
Oh yes, so many more to come. And also the recognition that right now, 80 years ago, people would have been coming onto the beaches that we see just to our left-hand side here. D-Day had truly begun on those beaches. The weather wasn't great. Today, there is not a cloud in the sky, Kay. It is a big blue sky above us. And here at the British Normandy Memorial, they're making the final preparations for a set-piece event that will involve the likes, well, the Prime Minister will be here, the French President, but I think the focus will be on veterans. About 40 of them will be in attendance. It's organised by the Royal British Legion. I'm delighted to say that Mark Atkinson, who is the Director General, can join us now. I mean, Mark, I think the word is momentous for this occasion. What are your feelings just ahead of it?
Well, it does feel momentous to be here on the 80th anniversary of D-Day and the Battle of Normandy that followed. And we're really proud to be supporting, as you say, around 40 veterans to come back to Normandy and to pay their own respects to their fallen colleagues. But also back in the UK, we've got events today all across the UK, but particularly at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, where we're also supporting veterans who were unable to come back to Normandy. We'll be supporting them to pay their respects there as well.
Mark, you will have spoken to many of them. I've had the privilege of speaking to some of these veterans. And they are a varied bunch, of course, aren't we all? But what comes across is so often is the vigour, the determination and the sharpness of their memories.
Absolutely. They're incredibly sprightly. You know, we've got a group with us who are ranging between 98 and 103 years of age, all coming in on the beaches down here, as you say, 80 years ago. But they are razor sharp in terms of their memories. And lots of kind of energy. There are mixed emotions. You know, people are experiencing a lot as they come here, but people want to come and pay their respects for their fallen comrades, but also to kind of come back recognising this probably will be the last time we have this significant number of veterans able to travel to Normandy.
Because the big events are always every 5 years, 75, 80. The next one will be 85. The brutal truth is there simply won't be many veterans left.
Well, I think that is the reality, but it's our job at the Royal British Legion to make sure that that service is remembered. That's what we're in the business of doing, through the Poppy Appeal, through the remembrance events that we hold, to make sure that the sacrifice and the bravery of our armed forces community is never forgotten. And the memories are fading, the living memories are fading of the Second World War, but we also celebrate and commemorate more recent commemorations as well. Kosovo 25 coming up at the end of this month as well. But our job is to make sure that that sacrifice is never forgotten.
Talking yesterday to paratroopers, and some of their training is still based on what happened here. Some of the lessons that the Army, the Navy learned are still in place now. How important do you think it is that we as a nation carry that memory of D-Day?
I think it's critically important that we do that, and at the Royal British Legion that's our job, is to be the custodians and the champions of remembrance, to make sure that each year we come together, all communities, to remember the sacrifice and the contributions of the armed forces community. Yes, in the Second World War, but actually also in more recent conflicts as well. So that's a really core part of what the Royal British Legion does, is bringing people together to remember the sacrifice and the bravery.
Well, thank you very much. Mark Atkinson, Director General of the Royal British Legion. So the sun is shining down on us. These veterans who come here, Kay, it is notable. These are people 99, 100, 101 years old. The oldest, I think, coming is 103. And yet you talked to them yesterday, and we'll talk to them again today. And what always comes across is two things. One is a certain pride in what they achieve. But I think that is always brought with memories of genuine terror, fear, and a sense, I hear repeatedly from them, that they wish the world would look at this and turn away from war. And there is, of course, a poignancy that this 80th anniversary is happening at a time when, of course, war is being fought on the continent of Europe.
Thank you. Of course, covering events throughout the course of the day here on Sky News. Thanks for now, Adam. And this evening, Sarah Jane Mee will have a special D-Day anniversary programme on the UK Tonight, live from the National Memorial Arboretum. That's coming up at 8 o'clock here on Sky News. Well, as you can imagine, election hostilities largely on hold today because of events. But, Mari, when the Conservative Bible turns against you, you know you're in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got the Spectator magazine. Looks like they're turning against the Conservative Party to reform. So the front page of the Spectator is Nigel Farage basically kind of leaping into the scene, leaping into the scene and kind of overshadowing Rishi Sunak, who kind of is tiny in the background and you can only really see his kind of shoes and legs. And that's to an extent...
Have a copy here.
Here we go, there we go. You can see that for yourself. And it's indicative, really, of how much Nigel Farage's return has bulldozed the Conservative Party, electorally, especially because they were, presumably hoping, he wasn't going to stand. He said he didn't have enough time, and then he changed his mind. And we've had that poll for Sky News that's come out, the first poll since Nigel Farage has said he's standing and says he's taking over as the leader of the party. And it finds that actually Reform are only 2 points behind the Conservatives. That is potentially really quite scary and concerning for the Conservative Party at a time when they are still massively behind in the polls. So I think that will cause a lot of nervousness this morning. The Conservatives want to talk about tax. They want to talk about that £2,000 figure that they were talking about yesterday. They also want to talk about what they say is this new family home tax guarantee, where they say essentially they're going to continue certain policies around whether or not you pay capital gains tax if it's your main home, and essentially you won't. So some of it is actually just keeping things the same, nothing really that new. Other things are, for instance, saying that they're not going to increase the number of council tax bands, they're not going to reevaluate council tax, etc. Labour trying to say that tax policy, argument has been completely and utterly discredited by the civil service, by the Institute for Government, who contributed to some of those numbers as well. And what they're saying is, look at the Tories on their tax record. The tax record is a 70-year high when it comes to tax levels. So what Labour would say is they can't be trusted to tell the truth on tax.
Well, we'll hear from Mel Stride in just a few moments' time. Let's see what he has to say. For now, Mari, thank you. Rest of the news?
Good morning. Yes, developing situations coming out of Israel and Gaza this morning. So let's bring you more details on those, shall we? The Hamas-run Gaza government media office says at least 27 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. Israel's military says it targeted what it called a Hamas compound inside the school in Nur Zayrat, which it claims Hamas has been using as a cover for their operations. We'll bring you more on that developing story throughout the course of the morning. Vladimir Putin has warned he could deploy conventional missiles within striking distance of the United States and its European allies. The Russian president made the remarks while meeting with senior editors of international news agencies in St. Petersburg. He said he could provide long-range weapons to other countries who could strike the West, much like NATO allies providing weapons to Ukraine to hit Russia.
We are thinking that if they consider it possible to deliver such weapons to the combat zone, to launch strikes on our territory and create problems for us, why don't we have the right to supply weapons of the same type to some regions of the world where they can be used to launch strikes on sensitive facilities of the countries that do it to Russia?
Well, let's bring in Ivor Bennett, who has the latest for us from St. Petersburg.
Well, as we know, the Kremlin does like to engage in sabre rattling from time to time, increasingly so nowadays, but this does feel different. This does feel like a step up in the rhetoric, because this is the first time that Vladimir Putin has raised this prospect of providing long-range missiles to other countries to strike Western targets. He didn't provide any specific examples, but he dangled it as a possibility, as a thinly veiled threat that he said Russia was thinking about. He made these comments to executives from international news agencies here in St. Petersburg last night on the sidelines of the Economic Forum, which is where I am, and he said it was in response to the succession of NATO countries, the likes of the UK, the US and Germany, all giving Ukraine the green light to use their weapons to strike inside Russia, something Vladimir Putin said would mark those countries' direct involvement in the conflict and he said that Russia reserves the right to act in the same way. So he's framing these threats very much in the narrative that he's built and constructed around the war in Ukraine, that the West is the aggressor, that Russia is the victim. And he also talked about nuclear weapons, saying the West is wrong to assume that Russia would never use them, reaffirming Russia's readiness to deploy nuclear weapons if it says there's a threat to its sovereignty. All of this, of course, coming as Western Europe marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, events that Russia wasn't invited to because of the war in Ukraine. I think these comments from Vladimir Putin will give cause for concern for Western officials and diplomats.
Moving on to Wales now, where the Welsh First Minister Vaughan Gething is refusing to resign. That's after losing a no-confidence vote. He's defiant after being seen wiping away tears following the vote in the Senate yesterday. The Conservatives called the non-binding vote. That was after Labour's cooperation deal with Plaid Cymru collapsed over Gething's judgment in accepting a contentious campaign donation. At least 4 people have died and more than 20 have been left injured after a train crash that occurred in the Czech Republic. The passenger train collided head-on with a freight train late on Wednesday night in the city of Pardubice, east of Prague. More than 300 people were known to have been on board the fast train service when it crashed with the other service. A man in Mexico has reportedly died from a strain of bird flu that's never previously been recorded before in humans. The World Health Organization says that the 59-year-old man, who did have other health complications, had no known exposure to either birds or any animals. The strain of bird flu involved, that's H5N2, is different from the one that's infected swathes of cattle throughout the course of the United States and also caused mild infections in some humans too. A campaign group has called on FIFA to, I quote, rigorously and transparently ensure that bids to host future men's football World Cups safeguard human rights. Amnesty International have insisted the governing body reject any offer that risks abuse, once again tainting the world's largest sporting event. This follows sustained concerns over the 2022 tournament in Qatar. We spoke with Amnesty's head of labour rights and sports, Steve Coburn.
We think FIFA has a choice. We think FIFA can choose about whether these World Cups will be sources of dignity or exploitation, inclusion or discrimination, freedom or repression. And so we're calling on FIFA to negotiate binding human rights agreements with all of the bidding countries before any final decision is made. And if those agreements are not made, and it's clear that there will still be human rights risks associated with the tournament, then FIFA should feel that it should walk away.
Work and Pensions Secretary is with us this morning. Mel Stride, of course, you're here more often than I am at the moment.
Good morning. Well, it's a pleasure to be at your bar with your finest water. Yeah,
Don't tell anybody it's vodka when it's straight vodka. Let's talk about this £2,000, shall we? How did you come to this assertion that the Labour plans would lead to a tax rise equivalent of £2,000 per family? Where did that come from?
So you take the commitments that they have come forward with, that we expect now to appear in their manifesto, you add up the amount of each one of those commitments over the period of what's called the scorecard, or basically the next Parliament. You subtract the revenue raises that they have said they are going to bring into effect, and you take the net difference, and that is £38.5 billion. That is your black hole of unfunded commitments. You divide it by about 15 million working, working households, and that's where you get a figure that's just over £2,000. So that's the additional tax burden on working households that Labour in government would lead to.
Let's go through it. The statistics watchdog says it's looking into Rishi Sunak's claim over those tax costs. You're going to stand by them, even though they're saying they're looking into them?
Well, the UK Statistics Authority has a role which involves looking at all sorts of statistics and coming to conclusions.
OK.
And,
so that's a yes.
I don't read anything into that.
OK.
Yeah, no, I stand by the numbers.
And what about the top Treasury civil servant writing? We've seen in the letter, they made it public yesterday, saying your claims shouldn't be presented as having been produced by the civil service.
Well, he's right in as much as the overall report, of course, as I've described. We are the people that have added up the numbers and divided by the 15 million and come up with the additional tax that Labour would be charging. And we've never said that the Treasury has done that. But what we have said, and it is the case, is that a substantial majority of those items within that report are actually a result of Treasury analysis. Now, the report itself is very clear on all of this, absolutely crystal clear as to where the evidence is for each one thing, and it's very cautious on those numbers. So the biggest number, Kay, is the Green Prosperity Fund, so-called, which Labour have costed at about 23 billion across 5 years. We took, because there's a general election in this year, just 4 years' worth of that. So we've got about 18 billion in.
Well, Keir
so we've been very cautious.
OK.
And what they've got to do, Kate, is they've got to focus on the substance, Labour. They've got to answer the question, where are the errors
Labour what they're doing,
in what we're saying?
If you're coming up with these figures, you've got to be sure. And Keir Starmer says that Rishi Sunak has broken the ministerial code by deliberately lying over these figures.
Well, that is utterly wrong.
You guys are just doubling down, aren't you? Everyone's against you. You're doubling down
we're standing. We've always had the same position on this, and I've talked you through how we arrived at those numbers. I've stressed the fact that they are relatively conservative estimates with a small c. This is nothing new, Kay. In fact, if you go back decades, this kind of process is a feature of general elections. Alistair Darling, then Labour Chancellor in 2010, carried out a very similar exercise. What's driving the animus of Keir Starmer and his colleagues is they know there are questions to be answered.
Well, I've got another question
if they can talk about throwing the smoke around, they can avoid dealing with the numbers, which are staring them in the face.
I don't know if you've seen our economics editor, Ed Conway, has looked into the data. He's very clever at it. And he found that since 2019, we've all experienced £13,000 of extras in taxes if we were to add things up the same way that you've added things up for Labour. So, in other words, the Tories have cost us an extra £13,000. There you go, it's on the screen. £13,000 extra in taxes since the last election.
So what has happened, Kate,
it's a lot more than
is that this country... Just hear me out for a second.
It's a lot more than 2,000. I think we can agree on that.
This is important, yes, but it's another number that, out of context that I haven't had a chance to properly look at. But let me make a general point, which is important, because I don't follow Ed Conway's every single pronouncement.
Well, you should, I think.
And probably I will do after this programme.
Yeah, I think you should.
But let me make this point. So this country has been through two, once in a generation, once in a century, external events. One was the COVID crisis that shrank the economy by 10% overnight. The other is the war in Ukraine that spiked inflation up to over 11%. We supported the economy. If you go back to COVID, through furlough, millions of jobs, all that unemployment that never happened because Rishi Sunak did the right thing. And we also supported people through those cost of living pressures with inflation. That totaled £400 billion worth of support. And I think most of your viewers would think it wasn't unreasonable for us to have to pay that down. So we have seen some tax increases, but the trajectory now, Kay, is downward.
£13,000
let's talk about what's happening now and what's going to happen going forward. So we've had a one-third cut in national insurance for 29 million people, worth £900 for an average earner. On pensions, we brought in we will bring in, if we're elected, the triple lock plus, which will keep pensioners out of income tax. Unlike Labour, who will not do that, and under Labour, you will see millions of pensioners paying income tax on their state pension for the first time, and we don't think that's right.
You don't... £13,000 extra in taxes, I mean, that is an actual fact. You don't even have the support, it would appear now, of The Spectator. I was surprised, shall we say, yesterday to see the editor of The Spectator saying there are serious issues at stake in this general election, and the Tories have just released nonsense figures with fake attribution and given it to newspapers who took it on trust. I'm really not sure that this will help their chances very much. You're in a lot of trouble when your Bible turns against you.
So I've already dealt with the numbers in the report that we produced.
So in terms of wrong.
What matters, Kay, in this election is who should get the keys to number 10. Is it going to be the party which has taken us through all those extreme difficulties, that has now got inflation down from over 11% to 2%, has got real wages growing in each of the last 10 months,
even your Bible
is putting
says
up the national living
figures.
wage to look after those at the lower end of the earnings distribution and so on? Or is it a party that has no plan and is basically going to take us back to square? You saw that in the debates. What does Keir Starmer stand for? I still don't know.
Let's not talk about Keir Starmer. Let's talk about
this
your
election
bloke.
is a choice.
And
it's a choice.
even The Spectator is saying nonsense figures with fake attribution.
Well, I've dealt with that. I do not accept that we have in any way misrepresented those numbers. If you read that report, the Chancellor provides a forward to it. The point is made very clearly that these are our computations, but they are based on information which, in large part, the majority of which has been a result of Treasury analysis.
I've got more figures for
I
you.
know that there are different ways of presenting that, and Labour will do so.
Here we go.
But they've got to deal with the answer. What do you do about the 38.5 billion black hole?
Reform is polling just 2 points behind you in the latest YouGov poll. That must send a shudder down your spine.
It's not over yet, Kate. We've got 4 weeks to the general election, and the only poll that matters is the general election. Now, you laughed the last time I said it, but it happens to be true. You'd have laughed when Theresa May was way ahead in those polls at this stage of the election, and it all changed very rapidly.
Yeah.
The poll that matters is what happens on election day. A vote for reform is a vote for the Labour Party, OK? So any viewer listening needs to know that reform are not going to be winning seats under the first-past-the-post electoral system. It simply won't happen. This is, I think, the 8th time that Nigel Farage, for example, has been standing for Parliament, and each time he's not succeeded.
That is true.
So, as a result, the conclusion has to be that if you are Conservative-leaning and you vote for reform, you will let Keir Starmer in with an open-door immigration policy, with no ideas on the economy, with all the hard work and sacrifice that we've put in to get to where we are now, with a better future ahead of us, greater financial security, growth going, real wages rising. All of that's going to disappear.
You're shouting that in the wind, it would appear, because no one's listening to you anymore. I saw that latest poll suggesting that you were going to be absolutely wiped out, and even you, with a majority of 17,300, would lose your seat if it came to pass.
Kay,
How worried are you?
I have fought. I've had majorities of anything from about 10 to 21,500, and every single election I fight it the same. I fight for every single vote. I have great pride in the fact that I've stood up for my constituents over many years on many issues. I hope that will be reflected in the result, but we will wait and see.
What job will you do?
I will fight for every single vote.
What job will you do if you lose your seat?
Well, I'm not going to speculate about that, and I'm not yet thinking in those terms at all. Well, I had a background in business, and I think...
We could write your CV now, if you
Well, that's an incredibly generous offer of you, Kay Burley, but not required, I'm afraid. Service is not needed.
OK, it's good to see you, as always.
You.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Always a good sport, Mel Stride. Thank you for taking the time. So, as far as the numbers are concerned, the latest we are hearing is that the Conservatives are only 2 points ahead of reform. That's referred to as the Farage factor. And certainly if you look at the front of The Spectator today, you will see that they are predicting that Nigel Farage will have a big role to play in this general election. And still, the government are doubling down, Mari, on those figures of the £2,000 tax.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I think we'll have to see how this plays out, but potentially it could end up being a slight political miscalculation, because as you rightly put back to him, our Ed Conway has crunched the numbers. He said, if we're going to play that game, we can play that game. And he's calculated how much tax every household has had increased
£13,000
in this one parliament, and it's £13,000. So, I think the Conservatives need to be a little bit careful with this, because Ed Conway is essentially saying, we can do this back to you, and your record isn't the greatest. We know the tax burden is a record high since the Second World War.
You did make a reasonable point, though, about the pandemic and the war in Ukraine.
Exactly, and he said essentially, inflation's gone up, and we had to protect jobs, we had to protect livelihoods, and also when inflation goes up, things like your debt interest goes up because interest rates go up. All those things then put a strain on the public purse. So it's a reasonable point to make. But what's interesting was when you put the question to him about the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury saying, we didn't sign off on this, don't try, telling ministers, do not say that we signed off on this. We are impartial, and yes, we crunched some of the numbers, but we didn't contribute to the policy document or that £2,000 figure, very much distancing themselves from that number. He kind of doubled down on it. He said, yes, technically they haven't signed off on it, but they were still behind it. And Claire Coutinho, the Energy Secretary, yesterday used the words signed off. She said the Permanent Secretary signed off on it, and she hasn't apologised for that. She hasn't retracted those comments. So the Conservatives really just trying to double down and hoping that the number sticks without potentially the detail around it, but it starts to unravel as soon as you unpick the numbers, especially when you've got people like Ed Conway on your team.
Exactly that. Yeah, all hail Ed Conway. It's good to see you. Thanks very much. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. Plenty more from Normandy as veterans from around the world gather to mark D-Day. We'll hear from the former head of the British Army, General Lord Dannatt, who is there this morning. We'll get Labour's latest take on that tax strike with the Shadow Defence Secretary, John Healey. Plus, the UK's favourite dogs are coming for your letterbox. Find out which at the end of the hour.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Interesting to and fro with Mel Stride this morning.
Very interesting to and fro. He declined your services, which was rude.
I'd be really good at it. Daily recruitment agency.
Exactly. CV, curriculum vitae. Here we go. But no.
No, absolutely not. And of course, you know, we're kind of playing our unofficial game of pre-election bingo, aren't we?
Yes.
All the buzzwords keep coming out.
We're all in there.
The difficult decisions, or the only poll that we pay attention to is the
only one
poll
that matters
is on polling day. But interesting, isn't it? After an election debate, Conservative Party very keen to reference the poll there, which showed that Rishi Sunak won by 51 to 49.
They created a whole new poster for it.
Whole new poster. Every other poll,
No Conservative poster. But the second poll that came out said that they lost.
No.
You know,
but, you know, Labour, Lib Dems, they're all saying exactly the same thing. The only poll that matters is on polling day.
OK. What else is happening today? Big day.
Well, big day. Big day, especially lots of focus on Normandy this morning, because veterans and world leaders will gather in Normandy to remember those who lost their lives 80 years ago on D-Day. The Prime Minister, along with members of the royal family, are among those attending the service on Omaha Beach that's taking place this morning. Some developing news in the last half hour. Gaza's health ministry, which is run by Hamas, says that at least 27 people have been killed in an Israeli strike on a United Nations school that was sheltering displaced Palestinians. For its part, Israel's military says it targeted what it called a Hamas compound that was inside a school in Nazareth. Here in the UK, the Prime Minister's claim about Labour's tax costs is being investigated by the UK's statistics watchdog. Rishi Sunak claimed that Labour have a £38 billion black hole in their financial plans, which the Conservatives claim will cost households £2,000 each. And Royal Mail has issued a new set of stamps featuring some of the nation's favourite dogs. You can see them there. The company says it hopes they'll remind dog owners to keep their canine friends at bay when the postie comes knocking each morning.
John Healey, Labour's Shadow Defence Secretary, with us this morning. Good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Just been chatting to Mel Stride. They've doubled down again on these £2,000 figures. We believe that your leader has said that it's a deliberate lie. Your turn. What are you going to do next, then, given that they've said no, it's not?
Well, it is a lie, and the deeper we get into this election, the more desperate that Rishi Sunak's getting. He's lied to us before on Partygate. He's lied to us about NHS waiting lists coming down. Small boats are increasing, not decreasing. And he lied on tax as well. And we've got the highest tax burden for 70 years now in this country, which just adds to the cost of living pressures that everybody faces.
OK, but you're not going to actually take any action about this, or are you? Apparently broken the ministerial code.
Well, that'll be for the Statistics Authority to pursue for now. But we're really clear that I guess the trust in British government is broken. It needs to be earned again. And one of the reasons that we have been so careful to say, these are our plans, these are the costs, this is how we'll pay for it, is that we have seen too much of gimmicks that make no difference to people's lives and broken promises. So Labour will not be raising taxes on working people. We will not increase income tax, VAT or national insurance. And where we have plans for first steps for change, we fully costed those. And if we need to find money, we have said specifically how we'll raise it. So, for instance, in the plan for a publicly owned clean power company, Great British Energy, we will put a proper windfall tax on the profits of giant oil and gas companies. That will raise the money to allow us to do that. And it's a fully costed pledge we make that will not involve raising funds, raising taxes for working people, especially income tax and VAT and national insurance.
OK, you keep saying, lots of you and your colleagues keep saying working people. What does that actually mean? Are you trying to catch us out there? Are you going to increase taxes that we don't really can put our finger on at this stage? Will there be any any tax increases under the Labour Party?
It means that the people who are working hard and still struggling to make ends meet, that are facing higher prices, higher rents, higher mortgage costs, and higher taxes since the Tories crashed the economy. It's these people who just hear Rishi Sunak saying that the country's turned a corner, that things are getting better, that somehow the pressures of cost of living are easing, just doesn't get it.
OK, but what about unearned income surcharges? We have seen those previously on dividends and, I suppose, interest and the likes. What are you going to do about those?
Well, none of our plans require us to look at extra tax rises, but we, of course, have got to see what the true state of the public finances is when we get to open the books if we win the election. And we've still got another 4 weeks to go. We've got a job to do to convince people that they can trust us in government and that we can provide the sort of change that the country is crying out for now after 14 years of Conservative failure.
But working people who have a little bit of savings, or working people who potentially have some shares for whatever reason and get paid dividends on those, are you going to tax those?
None of our plans require us to raise extra taxes beyond the ones that we've already said. So a proper windfall tax to set up Great British Energy. removing the tax breaks on private schools so we can get extra teachers into all our schools to raise standards, and closing the tax loopholes for those rich people who are registered overseas but living here, so that we can fund the drive to get down NHS waiting times with an extra 40,000 appointments.
So no extra taxes on things like interest rates and dividends is what you're telling me, otherwise known as unearned income surcharge. Thank you for the clarification on that. What are we going to do about Faiza Shaheen? She is not at all happy. As you know, she was blocked from being a representative for the Labour Party at this election. She's standing as an independent. She talks about the Labour Party of having a hierarchy of racism. How do you respond to that?
I understand why she's feeling disappointed. She fought that seat and that constituency at the last election, but she's been through the process that all of us as candidates for Labour have had to go through. I'm disappointed she's standing as an independent. And one of the really big changes that Keir Starmer has brought in as part of the changes he's made to Labour since 2019 and Jeremy Corbyn is to make sure that any allegations are treated through an independent process. And so any suggestion that there are partial treatments for some people is entirely wrong, because it's an independent process and everybody would go through that if they face allegations, as many have.
Yep, so she says hierarchy of racism. You are completely refuting that this morning here on the programme.
I entirely refute that. We've a long tradition and a proud tradition of being an anti-racist party. We've cleaned up our internal systems under Keir Starmer. They're now independent. There is a due process. Sometimes it can take a while, but it's a due process that is properly conducted, independently led, and that's the process, particularly in confirming us as candidates, that we've all been through.
OK, we're almost out of time. We started on tax. Let's end there as well. Just a challenge from Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, challenging Sir Keir to explicitly rule out an increase to property tax if your party comes into power. Is that something that you will agree to?
Look, there are dozens and dozens of specific taxes. The ones that are most important are those that cost working people the most, those that facing the highest tax burden now for 70 years.
Talking about property tax, Mr. Healy.
We will not raise taxes on working people. We will not raise income tax.
Talking about property tax.
We will not raise national insurance. And our plans, beyond the specific tax rises and changes that we've set out to pay for first steps.
But plans can change, can't they?
Our plans do not require us to start looking at raising taxes across the board.
OK, capital gains tax, will you increase that?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Capital gains tax, will you increase that?
Our plans do not require us to start looking at raising taxes.
Stamp duty, will you increase that?
We will not raise the taxes that are most important to working people, that are part of the
stamp duty
they paid after 14 years of Conservative government.
Will you increase stamp duty?
I'm not going to go through the list. I'm saying to you,
it's really important.
So the taxes that are most important to people, income tax, VAT and national insurance, will not be raised under a Labour government.
It's really important to a lot of people. Stamp duty, really important to a lot of people. What about council tax bans? That affects almost all of us. What are you going to do about that?
Plans do not require us to look at raising taxes across the range of dozens and dozens of taxes there are. Where there are moves that we need to make, like removing the tax breaks on private schools, like closing the loopholes on the non-DOMs that get away with living in this country but not paying their fair share.
I know,
those are the things that we will do.
I'm specifically asking you about council tax, property tax and the council tax bans. You're not going to change those at all?
I'm not going to go through a list of... We could be spending the next hour doing this, Kay.
Well, let's not. Let's just concentrate on those three.
There are hundreds of taxes.
Those three, what are you going to do about those?
we've responded to the lies that Rishi Sunak
Not
set
asking
out.
you about that, asking you about... Mr Healy, come on now. I'm asking you specifically about those 3 taxes. You are not going to change them, is that right?
We are not going to start raising taxes across the board. Our plans do not require...
Dear, you need to answer the question, because if you don't, people are going to think that you're going to put the taxes up.
Where we have plans to change the taxes, we've spelt those out, and we've said what that money that we can raise will be used to do. And these are steps that make a big difference to people's lives. Starting to bring down NHS waiting lists, starting to improve standards in schools with more teachers and breakfast clubs.
I know, but I'm specifically asking you about putting those 3
setting
taxes
up
up, and you
GB
won't
Energy
deny
so we
it.
get clean power and lower bills for the long term. These are the steps we know we can take. We've costed them. We've fully
I think
funded
my viewers
them.
are going to have to make their own mind up, because we're out of time.
How we will pay for those. And we've also given people the absolute reassurance that we will not be raising income tax and VAT and national insurance, and those are the things that count
most. You might
most.
be increasing capital gains tax, stamp duty and council tax bans, because you won't rule it out. And so my viewers this morning will have to make up their own minds. Sadly, we're out of time. Come in and join me whenever you like to. We'll talk about it in more detail. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Dan Needle, tax expert, is with us now. It's good to see you, as always. Thanks for taking the time to join us. I know specifically you wanted to talk about the 20% VAT and the impact that may have, and where that money might be spent and whether those numbers are right. Take it away. What do you want to tell us?
So, big question about Labour's plan to put 20% VAT on private schools is, what will it do to private schools? How many parents will leave? Will that create a problem with state schools being swamped with new entrants? And there was a headline in the Daily Mail last week saying that a report had showed that 4 in 10 kids would be leaving private schools as a result. That's an amazing figure. If true, it would be very, very serious. So we had a look at where that data comes from. We discovered it came from a consultancy called Baines Cutler, who'd sent out a survey to thousands of parents, received 30,000 survey responses back, and they just added up the numbers. So this wasn't an opinion poll in the way that YouGov or Gallup do, where you're randomly sampling, you're statistically controlling it. It was just a survey. It's statistically meaningless. And Baines Cutler had said it's statistically meaningless, but the Independent Schools Council sent it to the Daily Mail without that caveat, it seems, and we ended up with a headline which was false.
So what is your interpretation? If you crunch the numbers, what do you think? What's your prediction?
I'm not an education policy specialist. The Institute for Fiscal Studies looked at this quite carefully, and they thought there'd be something like 3% to 7% of children leaving private schools. I think the Adam Smith Institute looked at that and criticised that. They thought the number should be higher, but it's likely somewhere in that range. 40% is complete fantasy.
And just before I let you go, you saw the tussle I just had with Mr Healy about tax. How important do you think tax is going to be as part of this election campaign, whichever side of the fence you're on?
I have to say I find it a bit frustrating. We're talking about $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Taxes raise over £1 trillion in this country. And the biggest tax rise people are looking at the moment isn't from fiddling with income tax, national insurance, stamp duty. It's about $52 billion a year caused by tax thresholds being kept still while inflation rises. It's called fiscal drag. That's what governments do when they've ended up making silly promises not to raise individual taxes. They tax by stealth, letting inflation do the work. And so I don't want to criticise the UK, but I think it's a bit unfortunate that we play a game getting politicians to deny raising individual taxes, because then we're not having an honest conversation about tax, and we end up with tax rises anyway, but tax rises that we can't really see, and tax rises that are much more damaging.
OK, you make a very good point there. I'm going to put that in my armoury for next week. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. We'll have the latest from Normandy and the D-Day commemorations with former head of the British Army, General Lord Dannatt.
Why are children not writing for fun anymore? It's a difficult one to answer. I think there's a lot of factors coming into play, but I do think the current curriculum can sap the enjoyment out of writing to an extent, as it's so focused on process rather than creativity. And there are teachers out there who are doing an absolutely wonderful job, but I see them on Twitter getting quite stressed at the level of grammar they need to teach and assess while still fostering a love of reading and writing in the children.
Nowadays, there's instead of younger kids reading and writing as a hobby, what they do now is they go more on technology, for example, phones, laptops, and like even though there's lots of benefits that come onto that, it's not like they're even using ebooks on the technology, which they could do, but they still just don't.
I wouldn't say screens are necessarily the enemy as well, because there's my background is actually in video games, so I've done work kind of writing in video games myself, so I'm partly the culprit.
Well, you manage both. You manage both.
But there's wonderful tools like Twine, say for children who may not pick up a pen and paper and write. It's actually free software, and they can go online and create actual branching stories, so choose your own adventure kind of story games, and it's so easy to do. So there is technology like that that could actually encourage children to write that maybe don't want to sit down with a pen and paper.
The tips I would give is to just go for it, because like even if you're not writing on a piece of paper, you could still go onto all these different apps to not write like as in handwriting, but you could still like write stories. Like for example, there's Words, Google Docs, all these different things you could use to write, yet people still don't do it because I feel like they choose not to. They could, but they still choose not to.
Hello again, everyone. Let's return to Normandy now, where veterans and world leaders are getting ready to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day in a special ceremony of remembrance on Omaha Beach. With them is Lord Richard Dannett, former Chief of the General Staff and Chair of the Normandy Memorial Trust. It's always good to see you, my Lord. Thank you for taking the time. Tell me about the atmosphere there this morning.
Well, Kay, it's in contrast to 80 years ago when the weather was pretty foul and absolute mayhem would have broken out here. Explosions, gunfire, everything you can imagine. In contrast to that, this morning is a beautiful morning. It's a blue sky, it's very sunny. The crowds are gradually building up, the invited guests to the ceremony here. And I think it's going to be a truly splendid commemoration on this 80th anniversary of D-Day this morning. The King and the Queen are going to be here. President Macron will be here. I think the stage is set for a truly appropriate 80th commemoration of what happened here, the bloody day of fighting here on 80 years ago, on the 6th of June, 1944.
Have you had an opportunity to meet some D-Day veterans?
Yes, I was with a group of them yesterday. We had another commemoration at Colville, Montgomery, for the Spirit of Normandy Trust, and there were 9 veterans there, and it was a pleasure to see them there. And of course, when they come here today, this is what they always wanted. On the 70th anniversary, a number of them said to Nicholas Witchell, then working for the BBC, why is it that the Americans and the Canadians have got a national memorial and we, the British, haven't? Well, cut a long story short, now we have, at £27 million cost, this fantastic memorial on a 50-acre site. And it's in a perfect situation. As I look over there, it's Gold Beach, where the British 50th Division landed. Just over there was where the only Victoria Cross on D-Day was awarded. And then behind me, in the distance, is the remains of the Mulberry Harbour off Arromanches, where the logistic lifeblood of the campaign flowed in. So this is a splendid site, and the veterans are so pleased. They wanted to have a site where all 22,442 servicemen and women under British command who lost their lives, their names were all together. And they're so pleased that we've now got this memorial. And it's a tribute to them, and of course, particularly for those small number who are still living.
OK. For now, thank you very much indeed, my lord. Thank you. I was going to say enjoy the day. I'm sure that will be some enjoyment as part of events today. King and Queen there as well, of course.
OK, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's talk about dogs.
Yes. Royal Mail have released a special edition of dog stamps today. It's ahead of their dog.
I'm sulking about it. You knew that, didn't you?
Yeah. I think some of them are actually really cute. The corgi, for me, was my favourite one. Oh, we can see them now. There are 10 dogs in total on these stamps. It's ahead of the Royal Mail's Dog Awareness Week, which takes place in July. Of course, we know that we're a nation of dog lovers. Around a third of UK households own a dog. But it also has a serious message as well. They're asking for people to be reminded to keep their dogs away from the door when postal workers are trying to deliver mail, because as it currently stands, around 37 postal workers a week are bitten by dogs. Really? Yes. So it's about 2,000 a year on average. So it is serious, even though it's cute.
I can't help but think that half of those breeds couldn't actually reach the letterbox.
But it's also running out in the garden.
True,
in summer you leave your door open, the postman comes along, and
parcels. They have to open the door for parcels,
yeah,
don't you?
that too. So
my dogs would lick them to death. It's true. I mean, how can there not be Irish setters as pub? Let's have a look at those dogs here. Come on.
The border collie's so cute, though.
Oh, I mean, I get the cocker, obviously, gorgeous. Dalmatian meh.
Don't say that.
I mean, come on.
Did the film
Cruella de
ruin them?
Vil,
yeah.
And there's two missing on the end. What are they? There must be a pug there, is there?
I think a pug.
Yes.
And a whippet.
A whippet.
A whippet? Come on.
I refer you back to the border collie.
I don't even know what a whippet is.
A whippet?
I don't even know what that is.
Do you not?
What kind of a dog that is?
Dog racing.
No.
The races.
No idea.
Where's the Irish setter? You've still got time. morning, it's 8 o'clock, 80 years since the D-Day landings that marked the start of the end of World War II. We're live in Normandy throughout the morning, where world leaders are gathering.
We'll hear from some of the veterans who risked their lives to liberate Europe.
The Prime Minister and Labour leader will join today's events as the fallout from their tax row continues. The Work and Pension Secretary tells this programme he stands by Rishi Sunak's comments.
It's Thursday, the 6th of June. Commemorations are beginning this morning with reenactments of the D-Day landings on what became known as the longest day.
Sadness for those who've held, but pride for the achievements.
I'm in Vers-sur-Mer as global leaders and veterans gather for this morning's service of remembrance. The King and Queen will be coming, as will Rishi Sunak, Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron.
Hamas says dozens have been killed in an airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. Israel says that they had Hamas leaders hiding in the school. The Prime Minister's £2,000 Labour tax hike claim is investigated by the UK's statistics watchdog as the minister doubles down.
We've always had the same position on this, and I've talked you through how we arrived at those numbers. I've stressed the fact that they are relatively conservative estimates with a small c.
Following the money, we reveal which constituencies are being targeted most by online political adverts.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
And which of the nation's most popular pooches have made it onto newsstands?
Who let the dogs out?
It was on this morning, 80 years ago, that more than 150,000 Allied troops landed by air and sea on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. It was the biggest seaborne invasion in military history, one that would eventually see Europe liberated from Nazi occupation, ending World War II. Well, a short while ago, a piper played a lament to mark the moment the first British personnel stepped foot on the beaches of Normandy. Well, D-Day was a long and costly campaign, and one that remains permanently etched in the memories of those who were there, as our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
It was the day the world changed. Before dawn, on the morning of 6th of June 1944, Allied forces began the largest amphibious operation in history. D-Day. The start of the liberation of France and Western Europe, the catalyst for victory over Nazi Germany. Over 150,000 men from the Allied forces landing along the Normandy coastline. And now some of those soldiers are back, memories and emotions intact after 8 decades.
It never goes out of your mind that it's there all the time.
That's you, John?
Yeah, when I was 19.
Sadness for those who've held, but pride for the achievements of the arrangement.
It was a day that changed the world.
Changed the world, yes, that's right.
But when you were there, in the middle of it,
Yeah,
did it simply feel like horror?
horror is the word.
These are the men who don't like to be called heroes, but who do inspire, even the youngest.
They've been through a tough time and they should be respected in a good way.
So many did not survive D-Day. This region is dotted with cemeteries to the fallen. Here, the graves have been lit by candles. Today they will be remembered by nations still feeling a sense of deep gratitude. President Macron will be joined by Joe Biden and other leaders as they converge to remember and give thanks, but also to wonder what lessons really have been learned. Arlette was a 4-year-old girl on D-Day. Her home, a cafe next to Pegasus Bridge, It was the first building to be liberated, and she still runs it. She's aghast that war rages again in Europe.
Man will never learn. The war started from the Middle Ages and before. What is very sad is that the young people of today, whether they are families or the soldiers, are risking their lives again for freedom.
This is where D-Day started. Just after midnight, troops landed near here to liberate Pegasus Bridge, and people have come from all over the world to mark the occasion. But the number of veterans is falling. There'll never be another commemoration like this one. There was a sense of camaraderie here, of people who had come together in remembrance and respect. And then fireworks to mark the moment when the first troops landed. The battles and triumphs that followed still shape all of our lives. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Normandy.
Adam with us now. Hi, Adam. What's planned for the rest of the day?
Well, we are awaiting a really significant service here at the British Normandy Memorial that will be attended by veterans, by the King and Queen, by political leaders here. Keir Starmer is, in fact, just looking around as we speak. Emmanuel Macron will be here. And, of course, many, many other members of the military, lots of whom have a connection to D-Day. And one of them is with me now, Company Sergeant Major Dan Mayton from the Royal Marines. Dan, you're a senior serving officer, but just tell us, your grandfather was down there on one of the beaches.
Yeah, just to my left over on Juno Beach. He was Part 4-8 Commando. When he landed 80 years ago, he was 20 years old at the time. Quite impressive to see, you know, those young men did do what they did. Yeah.
And when you reflect on what he did, and compared to your experience, your training, what do you think it must have been like?
It must have been horrific. You can't comprehend what they were going through. He never really talked about the war itself. He talks about training and some of the relationships, as in good friends that he made during that time, and he would spin stories, he'd laugh, and then when I look back, he would get quite emotional afterwards. So I've kind of made the assumption that maybe they didn't quite make it when they got to here or further battles down the line. So yeah, they must have gone through terrible time. But we owe it to them now, because they to live the life that we lead now, that is all down to them.
Did your grandfather's experience lead you to, in a sense, did it make you want to be a soldier, or did it actually put you off?
No, not really. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew he had been a Royal Marine, and that if I was going to join, that was the only service I was going to go into. So yeah, there was a bit of inspiration there for me to join the Royal Marines. But unfortunately, when I did join, obviously he was super proud, but he passed away early on in my training, so he never got to see me pass out. And I feel that once I passed out, I think he would have opened up a little bit more about some of the stories, some of the experiences he's had, because we've had something in common.
What is the resonance in 2024 to what happened 80 years ago among military personnel? How much of a legacy did these people leave?
I think it's a huge legacy, especially for people of my era, because I had a grandfather that was still alive at the time, and I knew that he'd done what he had done. I think even for the young soldiers and sailors and airmen, it would be the same for them as well. It's a massive part of our history, and we've been given something that we might not have never had if they'd not won that battle.
What do you feel like then when you meet these veterans? There's 40 of them coming to this service today. I've been lucky enough to meet some of them, and they are extraordinarily full of vigour, but also very reflective on the horrors of war. What do you make of your encounters with them?
Well, I hope to catch up with some later, and I'm really looking forward to some of their stories. I was actually involved with the vigil last night, the part of the Guard of Honour, so I haven't had a real much time to actually catch up with them and speak to them, but I'm really looking forward to a chat, maybe over a drink later on.
Yeah, they're still quite capable of joining you for a drink. And as for this event here, I mean, we do have global leaders coming. Macron will be here, Sunak, Joe Biden is just at a different event later on. And yet I think the focus is always on these men in their late 90s or early hundreds. Yeah. And I guess that's how it should be. Yeah,
it absolutely should be. Because what they've done 80 years ago, an event like this won't happen again. I don't think. If you look at 100 years, most of these guys will be gone. So we got to take this opportunity. We owe it to them, the sacrifices that they made, and it's right that the political leaders should be here to be here for them as well.
And thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. It is going to be, I think, an emotional occasion for many of the people here. As Dan was saying, these veterans are now, some of them 101, 102, one of them is 103 here. These big events only come along every 5 years. And the brutal reality is that in 5 years' time, there will be very few of these surviving D-Day veterans left. I think this will be a poignant and important inflection point in remembering a truly pivotal moment in our history.
OK. Adam, thank you. And this evening, Sarah Jane Mee will have a special D-Day anniversary programme on the UK tonight, live from the National Memorial Arboretum. That's coming up at 8 p.m. here on Sky News. Now, the Hamas-run Gaza government media office says at least 27 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. Israel's military says it targeted what it called a Hamas compound inside a school in Nusrat, which it claims Hamas have been using as a cover for their operations. Let's figure out what's going on. Alex Rossi standing by for us in Jerusalem. What more do we know, Alex? Good morning.
Well, some of the images, Kay, good morning, that are coming out from Gaza are horrific. The Hamas-led health ministry inside the enclave says that this was a school that was attacked by Israeli forces. Now, the IDF has renewed its offensive in central Gaza in recent days. It has posted on social media saying that the school was being used by militants from Hamas and also Islamic Jihad, men that took part in the October the 7th massacre, and that's why they hit it in what they describe as a precise targeting operation. But clearly the situation inside the Gaza Strip is deteriorating all the time, the longer that there is not a ceasefire. We're hearing from aid agencies and also the United Nations inside Gaza who are saying that in some parts, particularly in northern Gaza, they are approaching famine-like conditions. So the impetus really to try and secure a ceasefire is increasing all the time. Now, there are negotiations carrying on in Doha. The CIA director, William Burns, is talking to the Egyptian and mediators from Qatar as well. This is the Israeli proposal as stated and laid out by President Joe Biden, but it's unclear really on where we are with it. Hamas has indicated on one hand that it would accept it, but it's also stipulating that it must be linked to a permanent ceasefire. It hasn't been dismissed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, but at the same time, he hasn't said that he will accept the proposal either. He has indicated privately, we understand, that he would be amenable for a 60-day ceasefire, but anything longer than that, that would perhaps be unacceptable to Israel. He suggested that only the destruction of Hamas and destroying it as a military and governing entity would be acceptable so that there can be no more October the 7th.
OK. For now, thank you. Thanks very much. Rest of the news?
Yes, focus now on Russia, shall we? That's because Vladimir Putin has warned he could deploy conventional missiles within striking distance of the United States and its European allies. The Russian president made the remarks while meeting with senior editors of international news agencies in St. Petersburg. He said he could provide long-range weapons to other countries who could strike the West, much like NATO allies providing weapons to Ukraine to hit Russia.
We are thinking that if they consider it possible to deliver such weapons to the combat zone, to launch strikes on our territory and create problems for us, why don't we have the right to supply weapons of the same type to some regions of the world where they can be used to launch strikes on sensitive facilities of the countries that do it to Russia?
Well, let's hear more from Sky's Ivor Bennett, who has the latest from St. Petersburg.
Well, as we know, the Kremlin does like to engage in sabre-rattling from time to time, increasingly so nowadays, but this does feel different. This does feel like a step up in the rhetoric, because this is the first time that Vladimir Putin has raised this prospect of providing long-range missiles to other countries to strike Western targets. He didn't provide any specific examples, but he dangled it as a possibility, as a thinly veiled threat that he said Russia was thinking about. He made these comments to executives from international news agencies here in St. Petersburg last night on the sidelines of the Economic Forum, which is where I am, and he said it was in response to the succession of NATO countries, the likes of the UK, the US and Germany, all giving Ukraine the green light to use their weapons to strike inside Russia, something Vladimir Putin said would mark those countries' direct involvement in the conflict. And he said that Russia reserves the right to act in the same way. So he's framing these threats very much in the narrative that he's built and constructed around the war in Ukraine, that the West is the aggressor, that Russia is the victim. And he also talked about nuclear weapons, saying the West is wrong to assume that Russia would never use them, reaffirming Russia's readiness to deploy nuclear weapons if it says there's a threat to its sovereignty. All of this, of course, coming as Western Europe marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, events that Russia wasn't invited to because of the war in Ukraine. I think these comments from Vladimir Putin will give cause for concern for Western officials and diplomats.
The Welsh First Minister, Vaughan Gething, is refusing to resign after losing a no-confidence vote. He's defiant after being seen wiping away tears following the vote in the Senate yesterday. The Conservatives called the non-binding vote after Labour's cooperation deal with Plaid Cymru collapsed, and over Gething's judgment in accepting a contentious campaign donation. At least 4 people have died. More than 20 are injured after a train crash in the Czech Republic. The passenger train collided head-on with a freight train late on Wednesday night in the city of Pardubice, east of Prague. More than 300 people on board the fast train when it collided. A man in Mexico has died from a strain of bird flu previously never recorded in humans. The WHO says the 59-year-old, who had other health complications, had no known exposure to birds or animals. The strain of bird flu, H5N2, is different from one that's infected swathes of cattle in the United States and caused mild infections in humans.
To the election now, and the money that parties and candidates are pouring into online political ads. Sky News analysis shows constituencies in the South East are so far the main digital battlegrounds. Tom Cheshire has more.
A quiet afternoon in Croydon South. Even with the campaign in full swing, it's easy enough to ignore.
It doesn't seem like it's too active at the moment.
There's not much going on, if I'm being honest, no.
I mean, that's kind of fun because we're right outside.
Yeah.
Have you seen much of the campaign so far in terms of people knocking doors? Well, obviously there's the event here. How's it?
I haven't much, not yet, no.
Despite the apparent serenity here, this is a battleground for another type of campaign. Both sides are spending big on online adverts on places like Facebook and YouTube. Croydon South is one of the most contested constituencies in the country, with Chris Philp, a minister, defending his seat against a Labour challenge.
This is every constituency in the UK, and because Sky has partnered with Who Targets Me, which tracks digital political adverts, we can colour this map in and see where parties are spending the most online. And from what they spend, we can tell what they want the most. Now, the pinky red is Labour, the light blue is Conservative. The darker the colour, the more they're spending. These are the 2 biggest spenders, but we will talk about the other parties too. And from that, we can look at the key battlegrounds, pick out the places where multiple parties are ploughing in funds. Croydon South is one of them, more than £16,000 spent so far, but we've got a whole top 5 here all around the country, and you can see these are the places that are most contested right now, all around here, but Hendon, the most, more than £25,000 spent so far in North London. Now, the clearest way to assess where each party is spending the most is to look at the constituencies where candidates themselves have the highest spend. This is interesting. So, the Green Party down in Bristol, here they are, they spent nearly £40,000 on Bristol Central. They really, really want to reach an audience in the seat. Conservatives, that's Hendon again. Labour, looking down at Dover and Deal for their biggest spend. Reform actually is interesting. Great Yarmouth, despite Nigel Farage saying they haven't spent a bean, they spent more than £3,800. Then you've got the other party, Plaid Cymru, and also the SNP. They don't actually spend that much digitally. So it is a hugely contested. This will change as the election goes on. One place we haven't talked about that's getting a lot of digital spend is Ynys Môn here in Wales. They're seeing so much as leading to election fatigue.
I don't need to be brainwashed every 3 or 4 minutes by adverts telling me how amazing they are when on the ground we know what we see as intelligent people.
All in all, it's enough to make someone yearn for the quiet life of traditional campaigning. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Croydon South.
And here's the list so far of the candidates who've declared they're running in the Croydon South constituency in Greater London. Returning to the election campaign, and the Lib Dems are pledging today to bring in a legal guarantee for the treatment of cancer patients. Joining us now from the Lake District is a former Liberal Democrat leader, that's Tim Farron. Hi, Mr Farron, it's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. What's the plan?
Well, first of all, the reality is that more than a third of cancer patients diagnosed with cancer wait more than 2 months, more than 62 days, which is the target figure, to receive their first intervention. And we know that for on average, every extra 4 weeks that you wait for that first intervention, there's a 10% reduction in your chance of surviving that condition. And so we will pledge, and do today, that it will become a legal guarantee that people would be seen and have their first intervention within those 62 days. Now, legal right on its own only does so much good. You need to back that with the intervention and the funding that would actually make the difference. In particular, Britain needs to catch up with the rest of the Western world on radiotherapy. We have at the moment in this country half the number of linear accelerators, radiotherapy machines that France does per head of population. And yet it is a relatively inexpensive form of treatment because it's about building or putting into place in the dozens of cancer centres around the country kit that would allow a relatively small but excellent workforce to treat and to cure cancer. We think this is a huge priority, which is why we're making such a big thing about it today.
And what would you do to prevent cancer as well as to treat it?
Well, obviously, that is significant as well. And that means that we've got to do things like tackling obesity, continue to tackle the scourge of smoking, promote healthy living throughout life. There's no doubt, however, that the big problem in the last few years, and some of it is down to the pandemic, is the fact that cancers are not being identified early enough. The problem, though, is if we identify cancers earlier than we have been doing, and then we don't have the kit and the investment to treat it, that's when the real tragedy comes in. So in my part of the world, we're getting on for 40% of people who are diagnosed with cancer. And you know enough about cancer to know that it's not a static condition, that the tumour or tumours within you are growing over time. And yet you've got to wait, 40% of people waiting more than 62 days for the first intervention to try and tackle that cancer to give you the best chance of survival. And that's terrifying. It's obviously happened in my family. I bet it's happened in the majority of families of people watching this programme right now. And that's why we think it's a priority. Obviously, from a compassionate point of view, it matters. But let's go look at brass tacks. The reality is there are so many people who, if they were treated sooner and treated better, then they would be in a position where they would be back in the workforce, earning money and paying taxes sooner than otherwise. So there's a strong economic to doing this too.
OK, let's talk about these pesky boundary changes. They're going to be a pain in your bottom, aren't they?
You mean mine in the Lake District? So I get even more lakes and even more beautiful places to represent? No, I mean, my patch is glorious and it's been an absolute joy to have even more of the lakes and even more of the
patch anymore. You haven't got a patch.
Good point. But it is my patch, even if I'm not the MP for it. This is where I live. And I'm delighted to do it. So, yeah, look, boundary changes happen every few years. And, you know, it's important that you don't whine about it. I'm embraced over the last few years the great opportunity that those boundary changes bring us. We've won the majority of the council seats in the areas that come into the constituency I've served over the last few years. And my job is to prove to the people who I'm not currently or haven't been the MP for that I will be as hardworking and diligent for them as I have been for the areas that I have served. But in the end, you only borrow this job off the electorate. They either want to give it me on the 4th of July or they don't. But my job is we've looked at all the online campaigning, we'll do plenty of that, but my job is to be immersed in those communities and knocking on all those doors, listening to people, trying to solve those problems. And not just doing it during an election, doing it all year round. Because if you've got a vocation like the one I've been blessed to have these last few years, then you do it by serving people, by listening to them and not just assuming you've got a right to be their MP. I have no such right.
Yeah, but your majority is tiny, isn't it?
I've had big majorities, I've had small majorities. In the end, the electorate is king. And my job is to go out there and try and deserve to be re-elected. And that's, in the end, in the hands of the electorate. But I love these folks up here. I love these communities. I trust them to make the right decision. We'll see what it is.
You did preside over the worst electoral general election result for the Lib Dems ever. I mean, what's changed? Why is it going to be better this time?
Well, a quick correction there. We increased our number of seats by 50%, which is, I'm sure Ed Davey is going to do better than that. But nevertheless, it was a decent result in 2017. But I think what's definitely changed since then is rebuilding the party from the grassroots up. And I think Ed has done an outstanding job. He recognises we've got an electoral system which is unfair. And so rather than whining about it, you go and engage with it in the way that is most effective, and that is by targeting our resources on those seats that we can win. We know that in large swathes of the country, only the Liberal Democrats can beat the Conservatives, from Eastbourne up into the Highlands of Scotland. You know, we are a place where we know, we're in a place now where we know we can win elections, and you're showing Ed doing lots of joyful things around the country. And in an election that has often come across as dour and uninspiring, having somebody who looks like he's actually enjoying himself, and therefore drawing journalists alongside him to ask serious questions about things like care, about the cost of living, about our environment, has shown that I think the campaign so far has been going very well for us. We're being very well led.
OK, we must leave it there, but it's great to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Love a Lancashire accent, love it. Douglas Ross, what's going on?
So we are hearing this morning that the Scottish Conservative leader, Douglas Ross, is holding a last-minute press conference at 9:30 this morning. Yeah, general election press
Interest
conference. Exactly, in Edinburgh. And they've said, you know, we apologise for the late notice, but it's happening at 9:30, and he's going to be available for clips. Really interesting, considering how last minute it is. Does this mean we could see a big announcement? Could this mean, essentially, that we could see something quite interesting happening in Scotland this morning? Trying to get in touch with some Scottish Tory sources to see if we can get a hint.
Seven Tory MPs.
Well, they're not MPs anymore, but there used to be Tory MPs in Scotland. One was one of those.
Because Parliament's dissolved, yeah.
Yeah, so candidates for now, and one of them was a defection as well.
Oh, right, OK. So let's ponder what the options might be, should we? I can see you're tiptoeing through the raindrops there. Could be that he's announcing that he's standing. I'm guessing he's said that already. Could be announcing that he doesn't want to be the leader of the Tories anymore in Scotland if he wins, but he still wants to be a Tory MP. Could be that he doesn't want to do any of those things.
I know.
I know, right?
It's so exciting, Kay. Trying to figure out why this kind of last-minute press conference all of a sudden has been sprung on us quite quickly.
Yes.
So realistically, it's probably going to be quite interesting to watch.
People ask us why we love politics.
Exactly.
So
it just keeps on giving, Kay.
Yeah. We're chatting to Mel Stride this morning. This is what he said.
That is utterly wrong.
You guys are just doubling down, aren't you? Everyone's against you. You're doubling down
we're
on
standing.
this.
We've always had the same position on this, and I've talked you through how we arrived at those numbers. I've stressed the fact that they are relatively conservative estimates with a small c. This is nothing new, Kay. In fact, if you go back decades, this kind of process is a feature of general elections. Alistair Darling, then Labour Chancellor in 2010, carried out a very similar exercise. What's driving the animus of Keir Starmer and his colleagues is they know there are questions to be answered.
This is about the £2,000 tax that the Tories are saying Labour will cost us if they get into power. Several organisations have said no. Keir Starmer has said it's a lie. So what happens now? Because he doubled down this morning.
Yeah, so the Tories are doubling down on that figure. They're not, distancing themselves from it. And what they're saying is it's been calculated appropriately and fairly, and therefore we can, believe the figures. And interestingly, our own data and statistics, economics editor, Ed Conway, has essentially used the same methodology to crunch the numbers of the amount of tax that we've had increased in the past 5 years, so over the past Parliament since 2019 general election. And Ed Conway calculated it out that it's about £13,000 per household. So the difficulty for the Conservatives at the moment with this £2,000 tax lie is not just that Labour are saying it's a lie, because then you can have a kind of a back and forth about who's telling the truth, and that's classic electioneering. But the difficulty is that if you start to use that methodology against them, then their record starts to look a lot worse, and that's really a potential concern for them. Meanwhile...
The Tories have said, in the form of Jeremy Hunt, saying, Yeah, ask Labour about what they're going to do about capital gains tax and council tax bans and stamp duty. So he did. Have to take my word for it. Here we go.
There are dozens and dozens of specific taxes. The ones that are most important are those that cost working people the most, those that facing the highest tax burden now for 70 years. It's important that we know that. So we will not raise taxes on working people. We will not raise income tax. We will not raise VAT. We will not raise national insurance.
So I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, so the Labour Party essentially not ruling out certain tax hikes.
plans.
So they're saying, what they're saying is our plans do not require us to raise any taxes apart from the taxes we've already said, so VAT on private schools and the non-dom tax loopholes they say that they will close. And that is their line. However, when you press John Healey on completely and utterly ruling those things out, he couldn't rule them out. Essentially what he's trying to say is we need to have a look at the state of public finances if we get into government, and then we can make those kinds of decisions. And until we have the full picture, we can't rule certain things out. That's how Labour would like to spin it, whereas the Conservatives would say, no, you're just basically not ruling out tax hikes because you don't want to talk about it, and actually you're going to do it through the back door. And interestingly, when you were talking to tax expert Dan Needle, he was actually saying that in a way, he was trying to say that actually stealth taxes are, tax brackets that are being frozen and therefore people get dragged into those tax brackets through fiscal drag. What he was saying is actually that's a really big issue, but because it doesn't look like a tax hike, then people can kind of get away with it. And he was trying to say actually on both sides need to be a little bit more transparent on what they're really going to do.
Just quickly on campaign funding.
Yeah, so we've had some new information from the Electoral Commission this morning, revealing that in Q1 of this year, 2024, the Conservative Party received another £5 million donation from Phoenix Partners, which is Frank Hester's company. To remind viewers who might forget who Frank Hester is, he is the Tory party donor who was accused of saying that Diane Abbott should be shot and that looking at her made you want to hate all black women. That was a big controversy, earlier this year.
Right.
And the Conservative Party have issued their statement through a spokesperson saying Mr Hester has rightly apologised for comments made in the past, as Mr Hester has apologised and shown contrition, and we consider the matter resolved. The Conservative Party is funded by membership, fundraising and donations. All reported donations are properly and transparently declared to the Electoral Commission, published by them, and comply fully with the law. And it goes on. So what the Conservative Party are saying is Frank Hester's...
So annoying. I didn't know that this morning when Mel Stride was coming in.
He's apologised and therefore they're saying nothing to see here, and they didn't rule out before. Do you remember when you quizzed them on this? They didn't rule out accepting more money from Frank Hester, and now they have.
There we go, £5 million. Thank you very much. OK, thanks. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. Plenty more from Normandy as veterans from around the world gather to mark D-Day.
Westminster may seem far from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but not for long. With a general election around the corner, we're bringing you Sunak versus Starmer, live from Grimsby. Putting their cases forward and facing questions from a live audience. Who will convince you to give them the keys to this place? The battle for number 10. Get the full story first on Sky News.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge. Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why? Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the link between stress and dementia. We'll also catch up with the Green Party. Before that, though, our top stories this morning.
Yes, let's remind you of those. Veterans and world leaders will today gather in Normandy to remember those who lost their lives 80 years ago on D-Day. The Prime Minister and members of the royal family are among those attending the service on Omaha Beach this morning. Gaza's health ministry, which is run by Hamas, says at least 27 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. Israel's military says it targeted what it called a Hamas compound inside a school in Nazareth. The Work and Pension Secretary has told this show he stands by Rishi Sunak's comments that Labour has a £38 billion black hole in their financial plans, which they claim will cost households £2,000 each. The Prime Minister's claim is being investigated by the UK's statistics watchdog. And Royal Mail has issued a new set of stamps featuring some of the nation's favourite dogs. The company says it hopes they'll remind dog owners to keep their canine friends at bay when the postie comes knocking each morning.
Pugs, trained killers. Let's get more now on the events taking place in Normandy this morning as veterans and world leaders prepare to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. A little earlier, Sky's Rhiannon Mills witnessed a reenactment of the Allied forces landing at Arromanches.
Well, we're here at Arromanches on what is this enormous expanse that's called Gold Beach, and it felt like we were part of something really special this morning as at 6 o'clock the sun rose and there was peace where 80 years ago there had been absolute carnage. At that moment, 6 o'clock, as those landings would have began, we could hear a bugler sounding the last post just by the shoreline as people in the 1940s military uniforms gathered in small groups to pay their own little acts of remembrance. We saw one group standing right by the shoreline and they burst out in this spontaneous round of applause. They'd also driven all of their kind of 1940s military vehicles onto the beach, those vehicles that they now see as so precious and important when it comes to trying to remember what exactly happened all those years ago. Of course, back then, it was what some people would describe a bloodbath. 25,000 troops would land just on this small bit of coastline. Of course, there are five landing sites in total along this part of the coast. 25,000 troops would land here. 1,000 were injured on that day. 400 were killed. Of course, the death toll was far worse on other beaches, and in the coming days it would just grow and grow. And as today, this morning, we see kind of the unofficial moments where people are paying their own tributes. As the day goes on, of course, we're going to see those big international ceremonies with all of the international dignitaries here coming to pay their respects, as all of those who lost their lives will be remembered.
Let's talk about stress now and the impact that it has on your brain. Manasseh Shanta Yaramala is joining us now. Thanks for taking the time to be on the programme this morning. What does stress do to us? How does it undo some of the benefits of the good things that we do?
So I can explain what we had in our findings. We looked at participants who are from memory clinic, those who are at higher risk of developing dementia, and they also have concerns with memory and cognition. So we wanted to see if people who have something called as cognitive reserve, this build up by staying active mentally, physically, and had higher social interactions. And this is where the stress aspect came into play. So we realized that stress had a negative impact on spending time in leisure activities, or even has frequent attractions from social interactions. So we wanted to see that if these kinds of beneficial effects of cognitive reserve and cognition and Alzheimer's biomarkers had negative impact on stress, and if it varied by subjective and biological stress. And we sort of found that overall higher chronic stress appears to negate or undo the cognitive benefits we have by engaging in mentally stimulating activity and participating in enriching life activities, which might make people more susceptible to Alzheimer's.
What can we do to protect our brains then? What is it that we should be doing?
I think one thing I have realized is in research, we do have a lot of multi-domain interventions, like we focus on diet, physical activity, but we don't introduce like stress management practices like meditation or even mindfulness. It's a non-pharmacological intervention. So I think it could be interesting to see if involving those elements into our everyday life, not just memory clinic patients, increases our overall brain health per se.
Interesting stuff. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for explaining that to us. Would love to talk much more, but sadly we have to move on to other matters this morning. But do come back and talk to us again. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. The Green Party says they're setting out a game-changing health and social care package. Get the details from their deputy leader.
Why are children not writing for fun anymore?
It's a difficult one to answer. I think there's a lot of factors coming into play, but I do think the current curriculum can sap the enjoyment out of writing to an extent, as it's so focused on process rather than creativity. And there are teachers out there who are doing an absolutely wonderful job, but I see them on Twitter getting quite stressed at the level of grammar they need to teach and assess while still fostering a love of reading and writing in the children.
Nowadays, there's instead of younger kids reading and writing as a hobby, what they do now is they go more on technology, for example phones, laptops, and like even though there's lots of benefits that come onto that, it's not like they're even using ebooks on the technology, which they could do, but they still just don't.
I wouldn't say screens are necessarily the enemy as well, because there's my background is actually in video games, so I've done work kind of writing in video games myself, so I'm partly the culprit.
Well, you manage both. You manage both.
But there's wonderful tools like Twine, say for children who may not pick up a pen and paper and write. It's actually free software, and they can go online and create actual branching stories, so choose your own adventure kind of story games, and it's so easy to do. So there is technology like that that could actually encourage children to write that maybe don't want to sit down with a pen and paper.
The tips I would give is to just go for it, because like even if you're not writing on a piece of paper, you could still go onto all these different apps to not write like as in handwriting, but you could still like write stories. Like for example, there's Words, Google Docs, all these different things you could use to write, yet people still don't do it because I feel like they choose not to. They could, but they still choose not to.
Just bring you these images, live pictures from France, Deauville to be precise. It's the US President Joe Biden. He has just arrived for the D-Day commemorations. They're just about to get into Marine One and then heading to the commemorations. The UK holding its national commemorative event at the British Normandy Memorial in Vers-sur-Mer, which contains the names of 22,500 service personnel who fell during D-Day. Lots of events that we will be covering for you here on Sky News today, including the Canadian President, Justin Trudeau, will be arriving as well, the French Prime Minister, the French President, and of course the King and Queen as well. More on that coming up in just a short time. Before that, though, let's say good morning to the Deputy Leader of the Green Party, that's Zach Polanski. Hi, Zach, good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. So you are suggesting, as part of your health and social care policy, that you want an extra £50 billion per year by 2030 to pay for it. What is it, and where will you get the money from?
Yes, so we need to defend our National Health Service. For 14 years, there's been massive austerity and underinvestment in the National Health Service, and we hear stories time and time again of patients in beds, of people not being able to get care, and certainly not being able to see a GP on the same day when they need it. And before that, from the Labour Party, we had private finance initiatives that have left a lot of those trusts and cares in massive, huge debt. So politicians need to be really honest with the public and say this isn't about moving small pots of money. Ultimately, we need this huge investment. Now, your question is totally fair. Where are we going to get that money from? Well, if we tax the wealthy, and I'm talking about multimillionaires and billionaires, just a modest 1% on assets of over £10 million or more, as well as bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax. At the moment, we're taxing unearned income less than we're taxing earned income, and that seems unfair. Taking all of these measures together raises about £40 to £60 billion a year that we could put straight back into our National Health Service for real hope and real change.
So you're putting taxes up then? Taxes
on the super wealthy, and actually there's a group of patriotic millionaires.
What constitutes super wealthy?
So assets of over £10 million or more would be 1%. Assets of £1 billion or more would be over 2%. I think in most people's books, that would be super wealthy. And in fact, there's a group of patriotic millionaires who are saying, please tax us more, because actually our country and our society is better when it's an equal society. So this is about making sure people who need dignity and care at the most times of need are provided for by the state, by asking for a bit of redistribution from those who have done very, very well throughout the pandemic.
And what about those who aren't saying, please tax us more? Are you not worried that they may leave the country?
So when I've talked to people about capital flight, there certainly is a risk that some people may leave, but often it's overestimated. And actually, I think that's a misunderstanding of why people invest in this country or live in this country. They live in this country because family are here, culture is here, history is here. And actually, I think if people don't want to invest and they don't want to say we want to put money into education, policing, their health service, then actually I think we should challenge that, because we should be prouder as a country of the things we can stand for rather than just being a place people can hoard wealth.
I've thought of a fatal flaw in your plan.
Please go for it. I'm sure you'll let me know.
I haven't got any MPs.
Well, we've got one MP currently, although she's not an MP now.
Down.
That's right. And so this is a huge moment where I think, you know, even people who don't support the Green Party in the past look at Caroline Lucas and go, there's someone who speaks authentically, who challenges power and has some really, really interesting ideas. But for too long, we've just had one MP, despite the fact that in the past, 1 million people have voted for the Green Party. So what we're looking to do at this election in places like Bristol Central, North Herefordshire, Waveney Valley, and indeed in Brighton Pavilion, is to increase our MPs. The last local elections, we've over quadrupled our number of councillors. And so we've proved that even under first past the post, we can and do win. So every Green vote across the country is a vote for real hope, real change, and more Green MPs in Parliament who will push a government to be better and bolder.
Talk to me about your birth policy pledge. It's been deleted from your website. The incidence of medical intervention in childbirth has escalated in recent years, particularly the rate of caesarean sections, which are expensive and when not medically required. We will work to reduce the number of interventions in childbirth and change the culture. Why have you deleted that?
So pregnancy can be really traumatic for people, and this is a really sensitive subject. The way Green Party policy is decided is every single member gets a vote at our national conference. That is then policy, and what happens then is it goes to a working group with our spokespeople. Now, our health spokesperson in the Green Party is actually a GP Pahlavi, who's out today launching our health policy. Now, with that, what then goes in our manifesto is decided through a manifesto working group. I realise this is very processy, but ultimately this will not be in our manifesto, which we'll be launching next Wednesday. We're always looking at that short-term policy, which is for this Parliament right now, what we'll do with 4 MPs, but we're also within our policy trying to have those wider conversations around policy, both on healthcare, but obviously the climate crisis too, and mass inequality in our society. Those are the things that are direct.
So you changed your mind?
It's not that we changed our mind. Those are a broader suite of policies that are looking at those strategic visions. They get filtered down.
You still think that?
Well, that needs to be brought by experts, not me speaking on TV, and ultimately those need to be health experts.
It was, I mean, it was on your website, so you must back it.
No, so it's not in our manifesto until it's in our manifesto, which will be getting launched next Wednesday, and I'd love to come back then and talk about the actual policies we have in our manifesto.
OK, it's great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Good luck on the campaign trail. Thank you. Now, let's talk more about Douglas Ross. We were telling you about him a little while ago. He's the leader of the Conservatives up in Scotland as far as the Westminster Conservatives are concerned. Let's get the latest, should we? Connor's standing by for us. Hey, Connor, what's going on?
A fairly dramatic 12 hours or so. It became apparent late last night that the former Conservative MP now for the northeast of Scotland, David Dogood, who had been intending to stand in this election in the constituency of Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, was being blocked from standing. Now, he has been seriously ill. He's been undergoing some spinal surgery, but he was clear that he would be able to take part in this general election campaign. He was feeling confident that he would be able to give that a good crack and that he would take part and go forward in this general election campaign. However, it became clear in a statement last night that he was being blocked from doing so by the party. There was a series of messages, tweets that were put out by various members of the Conservative Party wishing him well. But clearly the party said that for his own health, it was the best thing for him to do to step aside, and they would welcome him back in the future. That clearly has been uncomfortable for the party, and there's been some wild speculation over the course of this morning when the Scottish Conservatives announced an emergency press conference at 7 o'clock this morning that we are currently en route to. It's beginning at 9:30 this morning. And essentially, the Scottish Conservatives were not saying what they were going to announce. It was general election related. But we do understand, Sky News understands, that Douglas Ross is now going to announce that he will stand in this constituency. Now, this is interesting from a few different perspectives because let's remember Douglas Ross also sits as an MSP in the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, and he recently said that he would not be standing at the Westminster election. He was giving up his Murray constituency at Westminster and focusing purely on the politics in Edinburgh. So this is a U-turn from Douglas Ross. But what are the optics of this? A man who said that he was wanting to stand in this election and has been blocked apparently from doing so. And now Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, is stepping in and taking his place. So there will be some serious questions for Douglas Ross when he has this press conference in Edinburgh this morning, and we will bring that to you on Sky News as we have it. But we do understand Douglas Ross will stand as an MP in this election.
OK, for now, Conor, thanks very much indeed. More on that in the 9 o'clock hour here on the programme. A few weeks back, remember that we told you about the annual comedy pet photography, and we couldn't decide which one was going to win. This one won. It was the dog that was trying to come through the cat flap.
Or do some light welding.
Exactly that. Meantime, we've got more dogs today.
Yes, another Paulson story for you.
Oh,
Let me just pause for thought there. Or am I barking up the wrong tree? Sorry, stop.
So ahead of the Royal Mail's Dog Awareness Week, Royal Mail have issued some doggy stamps. We can see them now. There are 10 stamps in total with a range of dogs. It's to mark the fact that we are a dog-loving nation. About a third of us own a dog. But also, it's a, nice, cute photos of dogs, but with a serious message behind it too, as Royal Mail want to highlight that per week, on average, around 37 postal workers are attacked by dogs when they're out doing their day-to-day job, trying to deliver our post. So they've issued these stamps as a reminder to dog owners to keep your dogs away when the postman is doing his round, or postwoman, of course, are doing their round. So it's ahead of the Dog Awareness Week in July. But you know what? It made me think, I can't remember the last time I actually sent a letter. I have some Windrush stamps that have been in my house for a long time. So
I send postcards.
Ah,
do you?
Yeah,
I
love postcards, so I always post postcards every
And do you write "Wish you were here" on them?
I thought you said "Wish you here" for something. Like, I know she likes politics, but not that much.
Because sometimes I might be on holiday with my friends and I'm not going to write to my mum and say, "Wish you were here." Love my mum, but, it's a girls' weekend. Come on.
Isn't that what you're supposed to write on postcards?
No, you're supposed to write, we're eating this, we've done this, we've seen this most beautiful thing, love you.
Here's all the fun we had while you didn't instead.
Yeah, exactly.
More like, don't you wish
living
you were here?
vicariously.
We're very glad that you are here. We'll see you in just a couple of minutes here on Sky News. Stay tuned. morning, 9 o'clock, 80 years since the D-Day landings that marked the start of the end of World War II. We're live in Normandy. We're expecting to hear from Rishi Sunak.
We'll also hear from some of the veterans who risked their lives to liberate Europe.
The Prime Minister and Labour leader will join today's events as the fallout from their tax row continues. And the Work and Pensions Secretary has told this programme he stands by Rishi Sunak's comments.
It's Thursday, the 6th of June, D-Day. Commemorations are beginning this morning with the reenactments of the D-Day landings on what became known as the longest day.
Sadness for those who fell, but pride for the achievements.
Also ahead, Hamas says dozens have been killed in an airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. Israel says the compound was being used by the militant group. The Prime Minister's £2,000 Labour tax hike claim is investigated by the UK's statistics watchdog. The Minister this morning told us he's completely unfounded.
That is utterly wrong.
You guys are just
but the
doubling
reason
down, aren't
why
you? Everyone's against you. You're doubling down
we're
on
standing.
this.
We've always had the same position on this.
Following the money, we reveal which constituencies are being targeted most by online political ads.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
And which of the nation's most popular pooches have made it onto the new stamps? It was on this morning, 80 years ago, that more than 150,000 Allied troops landed by air and sea on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. It was the biggest seaborne invasion in military history, one that would eventually see Europe liberated from Nazi occupation, ending World War II. Well, D-Day was a long and costly campaign and one that remains permanently etched in the memories of those who were there, as our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
It was the day the world changed. Before dawn, on the morning of 6th of June 1944, Allied forces began the largest amphibious operation in history. D-Day, the start of the liberation of France and Western Europe, the catalyst for victory over Nazi Germany. Over 150,000 men from the Allied forces landing along the Normandy coastline. And now some of those soldiers are back, memories and emotions intact after 8 decades.
It never goes out of your mind. It's there all the time.
That's you, John.
Yeah, when I was 19.
Sadness for those who fell, but pride for the achievements of the arrangement.
It was a day that changed the world.
Changed the world, yes, that's right.
But when you were there, in the middle of it,
Yeah,
did it simply feel like horror?
horror is the word.
These are the men who don't like to be called heroes, but who do inspire, even the youngest.
They've been through a tough time and they should be respected in a good way.
So many did not survive D-Day. This region is dotted with cemeteries to the fallen. Here, the graves have been lit by candles. Today they will be remembered by nations still feeling a sense of deep gratitude. President Macron will be joined by Joe Biden and other leaders as they converge to remember and give thanks, but also to wonder what lessons really have been learned. Arlette was a 4-year-old girl on D-Day. Her home, a cafe next to Pegasus Bridge, it was the first building to be liberated, and she still runs it. She's aghast that war rages again in Europe.
Man will never learn. The war started from the Middle Ages and before. What is very sad is that the young people of today, whether they are families or the soldiers, are risking their lives again for freedom.
This is where D-Day started. Just after midnight, troops landed near here to liberate Pegasus Bridge, and people have come from all over the world to mark the occasion. But the number of veterans is falling. there'll never be another commemoration like this one. There was a sense of camaraderie here, of people who had come together in remembrance and respect. And then fireworks to mark the moment when the first troops landed. The battles and triumphs that followed still shape all of our lives. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Normandy.
Adam with us now. Adam, we've just seen the US President arrive, also expecting the King and Queen and other senior dignitaries.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Joe Biden is here in Normandy. So, of course, is Emmanuel Macron, Rishi Sunak. We've seen Keir Starmer and the King and Queen on their way. This is the British Normandy Memorial, where they are making preparations for a service which will be led by the King and Queen. As I speak to you, you can see there the band just about to move in to mark the start of this service. But despite all of these dignitaries, I think everybody here agrees that the stars of the show will not be world leaders. They will be the 40 veterans who have made their way out at the age of 99, 100, 101 to tell their stories, to bear witness to what happened on the beaches here. Gold Beach is just over there. And in the past few moments, some of those have arrived, and I spoke with one of them, Alec Penstone, a man I met a year ago at the 79th anniversary. He looked pretty vibrant then, and he looked very well now when Alec and I caught up here with some of his memories and some of his emotions on this very important and very emotional day. Shall I ask you about how you're feeling today?
On top of the world at the present moment.
Really?
But in desperate need of a cup of coffee.
All right, well, let me, before you get your coffee, just tell me, this 80th anniversary?
That's correct.
What does it mean to you to be here?
Well, I've never expected to live this long. I'm in the wrong side of 99, and that was the first thing. And when I was sent out to the Far East, I didn't think I was coming back anyway. So consequently, this is all a bonus. And I just don't realise how I've been spared all this time to be able to hear. I lost my beautiful wife 2 years ago after 77 years of marriage. So I'm thinking I'm a very, very lucky person. I've got lovely ladies like this on my arm and wonderful friends. And I've had a book done on my life, which is going to be a bestseller. And altogether, I'm very, very lucky.
And just tell me, being here with all these D-Day veterans, what memories does that bring back to you?
Well, you see, at the time, I wasn't in the landings. My job was to protect the ships going over. I was a submarine detector. And because we knew they had the U-boat pens at Brest, my job was to keep them in and sink them if they try to come out, which we achieved perfectly all through the landings. So, and then I went back onto Arctic convoys again. So,
you had a busy war, didn't you?
Yes. And then 2 days after I was married, I was sent out to the Far East. And I took the surrender of Hong Kong from the Japanese.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more thing before you go for your cup of coffee. Just tell me, what's your feeling about the lessons of war? What did we learn, the lessons?
They achieved nothing whatsoever except misery. That war is no answer to the various things. And I have in my pocket now a message from Putin, who gave me a medal, a bravery award, and then goes and pulls a trick like marching into the Ukraine. It's terrible, wonderful. But I just can't understand the human mind anymore.
Well, that was Alec Penstone. He's 99 years old, from the Isle of Wight, and still blessed with such vigour, with vim, and such a sharp mind. Alec is now in there with the rest of the veterans who have come today. If you look up in the sky, those are Hercules planes that have just come by and dipped their wings towards the Normandy Memorial, a sign of respect. The band that you saw coming past was the band of the Royal Air Force, and now we are seeing the start of these dignitaries who are arriving. This is the representation from Australia, and of course this will culminate in the arrival of the King and the Queen. As we say, Sir Keir Starmer is already here. Rishi Sunak will be giving an address very shortly, and Emmanuel Macron will also be in attendance. This is the first big event of this June the 6th commemoration. Joe Biden will be at an American service at 12:30. Then later on there will be an international service on Omaha Beach this afternoon. And then later on, I think notably, there will be a meeting of heads of state of Mr. Sunak, President Biden, President Macron, Chancellor Olaf Scholz from Germany, and also Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine. A meeting of leaders who will reflect, I think, on the lessons of war in the past and the challenges of the future. That is all to come. Right now, the focus is on this celebration, this commemoration, this reflection of D-Day. And let's just stay here. This is the British vehicles just arriving. And these are the flags just raised for the British delegation as it arrives from a long line of vehicles that are pulling in here. Of course, we await the arrival of the King and the Queen. I can see a line of diplomatic vehicles that are beginning to back up at this point. And that is the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who has arrived here at this Normandy memorial. He will be giving an address. Of course, this is an apolitical moment. All political representatives here talking about the need for this not to be about party politics, of course, but about a reflection on the lessons learned from 80 years ago, and also so much about the remembrance of those who gave their lives. Their names are written in this memorial, this Normandy memorial here. 4,400 people who died, Allied troops who died on the first day. I can see Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, has arrived as well. We know that David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, is here, as well as Sir Keir Starmer. And now the succession of dignitaries and also of their supporting vehicles pulling in to the Normandy Memorial ahead of this service. The first significant event of this 80th anniversary of the day that really changed the world and which still ripples down all of our lives, I think, still are affected by what happened on these beaches 80 years ago.
OK. Thank you very much, Adam. Alistair is here with us as well. Poignant day.
It really is. And I think for those people who represent the different nations that took part 80 years ago, a poignant reminder that this should never happen again. And hearing those wonderful words from the veteran who was...
Alec, wasn't he?
Yes. He was fantastic. And, you know, it is clear that the generation that saw war always sends instructions for it never to happen again. And, you know, with the Prime Minister having a chance to talk there with his Chief of the Defence Staff, all these significant members of the different parts of the armed forces who've gathered to play their part and make sure that when the King arrives, assembled are all the different nations. And the fact that the President of France is coming also points out quite how grateful France was, although many of the people who lived in this particular area of the coast were so horrifically bombarded and endured such a tremendously difficult time. It really was an outstanding achievement by all those who landed and started and created the bridgehead from which the ultimate defeat of Germany began.
When I look at events like this, spectacular in so many different ways, I always admire how much work must have gone into making events like this seem smooth and effortless.
Well, they do consistently follow the traditions of previous occasions. And, you know, we have witnessed, particularly when the Normandy Veterans Association used to regularly gather all those who were able here every year, and the template for that. But I think that now that this particular memorial at Vers-sur-Mer has been completed and forms such a focus for those who remain, and will be, I hope, a beacon of reminding future generations who, if they are brought here by their families or their schools, get a chance to learn a great deal about this campaign, about the price of battle, the cost of freedom, and all of that. And we'll also get the chance to see what people who are not much older than them faced so soon after their own school time in being thrown onto these beaches to defend the land that we like to think will always remain in peace.
I believe the British Normandy Memorial contains the names of 22,442 service personnel who fell during D-Day, and this year marking the first time the British Normandy Memorial has been at the heart of major anniversary commemorations. Veterans and 2,000 guests all attending.
Yes, it will be a chance for all those who are lucky enough to come, and particularly for the young who will be among them. And the cadets. There's always a plethora of cadets who particularly enjoy the opportunity of getting to something like this, to see if they are at places filled with all the memorials. This is at the American Cemetery, which itself is overpowering. You see all the crosses that they have there, Stars of David too, and other religious symbols as the president arrives on literally the hills above where the battle took place.
We saw him alight from Air Force One just a short time ago, Marine One bringing him to this point. He will be taking part, as indeed will our King and Queen, who, if you look at this morning's papers, had tears in their eyes yesterday.
Well, I think that everyone reacts to these things in a private and emotional way, and I expect the King and Queen will recall not only the situations faced by people back in 1944 and during the Second World War, but, you know, the King has been involved with military organisations throughout his life and has seen the impact of operations and conflicts that the British Armed Forces have been involved in since. I think these things are very personal for a monarch who knows that, in a sense, the armed forces lay down their lives in the monarch's name. And his grandfather, George VI, was very much the focus for the British Armed Forces and the Imperial Armed Forces, as they then were, during that great fight, not only here in Europe, but also in the Far East and also in Italy at pretty much the same time when Rome had just been liberated. And all of that was a burden, I think, for George VI to carry, and he passed it on to Elizabeth II, and she has given that relay baton to the King, and today he will embody that. But when you go to this American cemetery, which we can see now, and look at the endless line of crosses, it's very overwhelming. When you go halfway through it, you think you're coming to the end, and suddenly the ground falls away, and exactly the same number again of graves lie out in front of you. And it was always said that if you take wet sand and rub the name on these white crosses and then brush the residue away, you can actually see much more clearly in the dark, wet sand the name of each of the American soldiers who lost their lives.
Let's hear from Rishi Sunak.
Because only by remembering can we make certain that the cause you fought for, that so many of your friends and colleagues died for, that great cause of freedom, peace, and democracy, will never be taken for granted. That is why we come here today. That is why we honour our veterans, now and always. And that is why I ask those who can to now rise. And please join me please join me in giving our heroes the welcome they so deserve.
We've just momentarily lost our communication with the Prime Minister. Alistair is still with me, of course. And Alistair, we're just waiting to hear or to see the King and Queen arrive.
Well, that, of course, is the focus of the event. The King stayed in France last night. First time he's been staying abroad since his cancer diagnosis. And a chance for him, again, to represent the nation at something that really matters. And he will be the focus, as I was saying just now. You know, he carries on that baton that was held high by his grandfather, King George VI, throughout the war. And I think for the generation who fought for King George VI, to have his grandson, their king, with them today at Vers-sur-Mer will be really the apogee of what it's all about. And they've made this journey. It is a pilgrimage for them. They've come over, as we saw, Rhiannon was with them on board the ferry as they came over. Countless different volunteer organisations help these amazing veterans, not least their own families who come in large number. And it is excellent to see that sort of community that gathers always on these amazingly sun-soaked beaches.
Canadian?
Yes,
Captain Perret has climbed down the line.
At Juno Beach, where the Canadians, who were immensely successful on the first day, landing and taking an enormous amount of land, which was a huge achievement. And they were landing in between the two British beaches of Gold and Sword. But it's great to see the way each of the nations mark these moments. And the Prince of Wales has attended the Canadian celebration today. He'll be with the Canadians, marking their very special memory.
What role does the Prince of Wales play in these D-Day commemorations, more generally?
Well, he will be at the Canadian celebrations or commemorations now, and then later on he will represent the King when all the heads of state gather at the American beach later on. It's been decided that for the King there will just be too many people there and it would be unwise for him. But, you know, coordinating what's going on in the sky with what was happening on the beaches themselves and the landing craft, it's just so difficult to comprehend quite how rough it was on the 6th of June 1944. And for those landing craft, the dropping of the front gate and the running ashore, generally into quite deep water. And then for the landing craft who'd had a terrible time being bombarded and shot at relentlessly from the defensive positions that the Nazis had along the Atlantic Wall, then had to go out, get another lot of troops and bring them in, and relentlessly doing it again and again. And for me, it's always those who were commanding and crewing the landing craft who I often think about, because it must have been so difficult to go away from it and then turn around knowing what hell was and return to it again and again.
And those, when the tail dropped on the landing craft, having to run through the water, as you said, and a vast expanse of beach before they could get to any sort of cover or safety.
Well, it was a billiard board, and if you're a soldier, you want to get behind something to fight, not just be exposed in the way that they were. They were just so exposed, particularly at the lowest tides. And the tidal arrangements, it had all been decided that they would land on a moonless morning, which would give more chance to get ashore. But also, it was a moonless morning when the tide was quite far out. So that exposed all the various beach defences, which would make it easier to come in. But it meant for the soldiers themselves, they had to run, as you say, over this exposed area, which in itself until they'd established themselves. You see, once you've established yourself and you've placed a position, a first beachhead to stop those who are attacking you literally as you get out of the beach, before that happens, it was just carnage on those beaches.
So many souls fell that day.
They certainly did, and, you know, thousands were lost. But Churchill thought many, many more would. It turns out that, you know, it was an audacious... And look, here we are, coming in with the White Ensign at the back, one of the many vehicles that brought ashore tanks and equipment designed to float, and, you know, they had their motors, and then they had wheels too, so we might see it come out and go up at the beach very shortly. But for those driving them in, again, being bombarded, they're not terribly well protected, terribly easy to engage with from gunnery, locked into the Atlantic wall or dug in. And so it was a very exposed challenge. But let's see, they're coming past some of those floating docks, and those too were absolutely vital. Where my family have been in the south coast, we have these posts which mark where the fuel was brought down from the Midlands to go on pipeline under the ocean, Pluto. And that pipeline was pulled across with the invading forces in order to provide fuel so that as soon as they had landed, they had the fuel to carry on. I wanted to see that vehicle go up the beach.
Yeah, I did see it just go up the
Just started.
That was it, yeah. You're watching British D-Day ceremonies here. Actually, it's in Normandy. We're watching it live here. As you are in the UK, we will have continuing coverage in just a moment. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Oh, I can hear myself back. I'm sure we can sort that out in just a second. Coming up, we'll hear from another champion hoping to win another gold in Paris. Before that, here's the King.
Not just in the currently serving personnel to greet them, but of course the hundreds inside that were there on the day and in the days and weeks after, when eventually by time...
We'll sort out that melee and bring you more in just a few moments, of course. It's D-Day events today, the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
Ordinary men and women went and signed up and then did extraordinary things for so many of us that followed. And in the turn of that, we're heroes. But we see a small handful now, don't we, in this probably last big 5-yearly anniversary.
Yeah, we just saw Alec. Did you see Alec?
Yeah.
And he was he lost his good lady a couple of years ago, but he didn't stop him having a little flirt with some of those ladies looking after him today. Good old boy. Good on him. Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that.
I enjoyed one of the 98-year-olds, I think yesterday, referring to a couple of his lads.
Yes.
And they were 99 apiece, but they were still the lads.
Yeah.
And it shows that camaraderie that it's existed for decades now.
Exactly that.
Right, you have the top stories, yeah, let's do that. Like we've just been saying, veterans and world leaders gathering in Normandy. We've just seen the King and the Queen, remembering those who lost their lives 80 years ago on D-Day. The Prime Minister and members of the royal family attending the service on Omaha Beach this morning. Gaza's health ministry, which is run by Hamas, says at least 27 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. Israel's military says it targeted what it called a Hamas compound inside a school in Nazareth. Work and Pensions Secretary has told this programme he stands by Rishi Sunak's comments that Labour has a £38 billion black hole in their financial plans, which will cost households reportedly £2,000 each, the Conservatives claim. The Prime Minister's claim is being investigated, though, by the UK's statistics watchdog. And Royal Mail has issued a new set of stamps featuring some of the nation's favourite dogs. The company says it hopes they'll remind dog owners across the UK to keep their canine friends at bay when the posties come knocking each morning.
Let's talk about D-Day in a little bit more detail, should we? Steve Ballinger is here, Director of Comms for British Future. Why is D-Day, why does it continue to be so important?
Well, of course, it's one of the absolute pivotal moments in the Second World War, and it's right that we commemorate and pay tribute to all of those who made that sacrifice. But, of course, it was just one of the battles. This is a global war happening in places all around the world. In 1944, there were really important battles taking place in India, in Burma, in Italy, involving soldiers from India, from Africa, from the Caribbean as well. And one of the things we're saying today is that it's important that we remember those stories too, and yet most people actually aren't aware of the service and sacrifice from those soldiers around the Commonwealth, despite the fact that many of them may have ancestors living here in Britain today.
Could you recount some stories for us?
Certainly. I mean, the Battle of Monte Cassino took place in 1944. It finished 80 years ago, about a couple of weeks ago, and yet only 30% of the population of the UK actually able to associate it with World War II. One of the soldiers that fought in that battle, Sepoy Kamal Ram, was just 19 when he stormed 2 machine gun emplacements, and he was awarded the Victoria Cross by the King for that act of gallantry. And actually in 1944, soldiers from Muslim, Hindu, Sikh faiths were all awarded Victoria Crosses, as were Gurkhas from Nepal as well. And yet only 38% of the public are aware that Muslim soldiers were fighting for Britain back in 1944. And we think it's really important that people know this. It's good for integration, it's good for having a shared sense of shared history and identity today if we remember all of those who served in the World Wars.
How has what happened on D-Day and other events that you're talking about shaped what we believe Britain is today, our values and the way that we appreciate and support our old soldiers, some of whom we've seen today?
Yeah, I mean, our history is hugely important to us, isn't it, in this country?
Yeah.
And perhaps nothing has shaped our sense of identity and our sense of history in Britain like the Second World War. It's why remembrance is a moment when we all stop and take stock and remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation and for the freedoms. You know, it's quite telling that we're stopping during a general election. People were defending freedom back in the 1940s in the Second World War against fascism. We've taken a break from the hostilities of the general election today to mark that.
Yeah.
So I think it's incredibly important that we continue to remember that, but we want to include everybody in that history. So one of the things we're calling for is more work to be done in schools to make sure that all of the stories are told. We run a fantastic project called Remember Together with 2 very diverse schools in East London and in Rochdale, where students from diverse backgrounds actually researched the World War II stories from within their own community and brought them to light. And it was a fantastic way of bringing young people in touch with events that happened such a long time ago that they could almost feel out of touch with that. So we need to keep reminding people of what happened. It's very hard to think, if you're a teenager today, that some of those guys may have been only 2 or 3 years older than them when they were sent out, not really knowing what was going to happen, and many of them never came back.
That's true. That's true. Steve Fenai, thank you. Thanks very much. Alistair's with us to talk us through some images we've just seen of the King and Queen, Alistair.
Yes, the King and Queen arriving at Vers-sur-Mer and received there by the British ambassador to France, Mena Rawlings, who has been organising this event, and with the King, obviously, Her Majesty the Queen. And the King, dressed as a field marshal and carrying a field marshal's baton, is then introduced to the significant people who've been gathered here. And it's really the moment that these events to mark the 80th anniversary really get underway. And you'll see that is the mayor. Mayors always wear a sash with the blue closest to their neck. All the other senior parts of the councils, as they are in France, have the red closest, but the mayor has blue. The King is meeting the Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, who we spoke to on Sky News only yesterday. It's a huge event for the King to have the chance to represent the nation, and with him different members of the household who are organising to make sure that the King and the Queen are taken to the right location in order to witness all the events that are going to take here. And this memorial has become such an important part of the focus, not only of the survivors of the Normandy landings, but also for those who wish to learn the story and to remember the immense cost of that initial landing. The Guard of Honour of the Royal Air Force waiting there close by, and the King and Queen will be passing them as they head on into the event itself. But for the King, the chance now, having come to France to stay the night last night, and then to lead the nation's representation here. The Field Marshal's baton that the King is carrying was given to him by the late Queen, and of course after Montgomery had led the armed forces so brilliantly in their landing, he was made a Field Marshal by King George VI in September 1944. But it's out into the waters that our eyes return.
We will, of course, continue our coverage throughout the day here on Sky News for the British D-Day ceremony, which is already underway in Normandy. Several other events planned for later on in the day, Alistair.
Yes, at the same time, we have the Prince of Wales with the Canadians at Juno Beach, and then eyes will turn later on in the day to Arras up in the north or in the Midlands of the United Kingdom, where the memorial there will be attended by the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. And at the same time, the Prince of Wales will head over this afternoon to join all the other heads of state of nations that took part in D-Day at the American War Cemetery. And there, President Joe Biden will be the host. And so members of the royal family playing their part throughout the events.
Indeed so. Thank you, Alistair, for now. Thank you. Post Office inquiry continues today with Alice Perkins, the former Post Office chairwoman, giving evidence for a second day. Let's get more. Rachel standing by for us. Hi, Rachel. So what's the plan today?
Well, today it's going to be more difficult questions, I think, for Alice Perkins, who was the chairwoman of the Post Office from 2011 to 2015, which was, of course, that period of time in which evidence was only mounting about the huge number of concerns around the Horizon system and the hundreds of sub-postmasters who'd been prosecuted based on that faulty system over a number of years. Yesterday, the evidence from Alice Perkins began with a heartfelt apology. She insisted that she was truly sorry to the sub-postmasters and their families. But pretty quickly, the inquiry's lawyer, Jason Beer-Casey, started to drill in on what she knew and when. And it turned out that within just a few weeks of her taking the top job at the Post Office, she was warned by their auditors. Somebody at Ernst & Young told her that they were concerned about the accuracy of the data that came from Horizon. They described it, and we saw the handwritten notes that she took from that meeting, as a real risk. And she was even told about a number of fraud cases where people had been prosecuted and that they thought it was down to a system error. So she was warned about this, but she seems to have done very little about it. And this was just one of the exchanges that followed.
Was he drawing a link between the data accuracy issue and criminal prosecutions?
I did not see it that way at the time.
Why did you not see it that way at the time?
I'm a human being, and I didn't see it.
Well, it would be another 4 years before the prosecutions of sub-postmasters would be stopped. And in that time, Ms. Perkins was responsible, or was certainly involved in both the hiring, and she was involved in the sacking of Second Sight, the forensics data team that were brought in to independently investigate Horizon. So we're expecting things to get underway in the next couple of minutes here at the Post Office inquiry. More questions, I think, about the involvement in Second Sight. More difficult questions for Alice Perkins.
OK, for now, thank you. Well, the Hamas-run Gaza government media office says at least 27 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a UN school sheltering displaced Palestinians. Israel's military says it targeted what it called a Hamas compound inside a school in Nusrat, which it claims Hamas has been using as a cover for their operations. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi is in Jerusalem for us. So what happened? Alex, good morning.
Good morning, Kay, from Jerusalem. Well, this happened in the early hours in central Gaza, the Nusrat refugee camp. Now, it's a school where many displaced people have been sheltering, and it was hit by an Israeli airstrike in the early hours. Now, according to the Gaza-run health ministry, at least 27 people have been killed. But according to local media, the actual figure now has risen above 30. On social media, we've seen images of people being taken, including women, men and children, to hospital with fairly serious injuries as well. Now, the Israeli military say that they did everything that they could to try and limit civilian casualties, but they claim that this school was being used by Hamas militants and militants from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who were directly involved in the October the 7th massacre, which was why it was hit. Now, of course, aid agencies are saying that this is another example of why there needs to be a ceasefire immediately to stop this humanitarian situation worsening. But on that front, the indications are not looking particularly promising. We've had in the last hour an explanatory note, what Hamas calls an explanatory note, on their position. They say that they are remaining flexible, but they say that the Israeli proposal, as put forward by Joe Biden, the American president, on Friday, is contradictory. They also say that within that proposal, it is only linked to a temporary ceasefire, not a permanent ceasefire. So the indications at the moment are looking that is caught and is not going to progress further. On the Israeli front, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has indicated he would be amenable for a 6-week ceasefire, but his position has remained that the total destruction of Hamas militarily and also as a governing entity really remains the priority of the Israeli military. So it appears that their ceasefire negotiations are at something of an impasse at the moment.
OK, for now, thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. Plenty more from Normandy as veterans from around the world gather to mark D-Day.
Why are children not writing for fun anymore?
It's a difficult one to answer. I think there's a lot of factors coming into play, but I do think the current curriculum can sap the enjoyment out of writing to an extent, as it's so focused on process rather than creativity. And there are teachers out there who are doing an absolutely wonderful job, but I see them on Twitter getting quite stressed at the level of grammar they need to teach and assess while still fostering a love of reading and writing in the children.
Nowadays, there's instead of younger kids reading and writing as a hobby, what they do now is they go more on technology, for example, phones, laptops, and like even though there's lots of benefits that come onto that, it's not like they're even using ebooks on the technology, which they could do, but they still just don't.
I wouldn't say screens are necessarily the enemy as well, because there's my background is actually in video games, so I've done work kind of writing in video games myself, so I'm partly the culprit.
Well, you manage both. You manage both.
But there's wonderful tools like Twine, say for children who may not pick up a pen and paper and write. It's actually free software, and they can go online and create actual branching stories, so choose your own adventure kind of story games, and it's so easy to do. So there is technology like that that could actually encourage children to write that maybe don't want to sit down with a pen and paper.
The tips I would give is to just go for it, because like even if you're not writing on a piece of paper, you could still go onto all these different apps to not write like as in handwriting, but you could still like write stories. Like for example, there's Words, Google Docs, all these different things you could use to write, yet people still don't do it because I feel like they choose not to. They could, but they still choose not to.
French President Macron has just arrived for the D-Day anniversary commemorations. Here he is. Alistair also with us. The last to arrive, these commemorations with his beautiful wife, of course. Brigitte, these events taking place on French soil.
And met by the Prime Minister and the Ambassador from the United Kingdom to France, men of Rawlings. The President of France and his wife obviously are in their own nation here, so they're welcome to the memorial by the United Kingdom, which is a courtesy and a special one to have the President come and express France's gratitude again for the allies who landed here 80 years ago today and for whom the liberation meant so much. The incredible work that was done by all those French brave people who were working against the Nazis throughout the occupation and who had done so much to create diversions and chaos for all those who were trying to keep the Allies away. The Nazis were constantly having to deal with the resistance, and the liberation that came changed the future of the independence of France once more. So for the President, meeting those responsible for the organisation of this event, a chance to meet there the Defence Attaché from the United Kingdom to France, who works with the ambassador, and the Defence Services Secretary, who has helped put together this event, Major General Eldon Miller, who will lead the French President into the event where he will be with His Majesty the King and the Queen.
Rishi Sunak there as well. Of course, as I said, continuing coverage throughout the day with Alistair here on Sky. Meantime, we understand the Scottish Conservative leader, Douglas Ross, is to stand in the general election. Connor's standing by for us. Was there ever any doubt, Connor?
Well, it has been quite the 12 hours, Kay. We have now confirmation that Douglas Ross, the Scottish Conservative leader, the MSP here in Scotland, and the MP who's just quit from the Murray area in this general election campaign, he has just been in this room here in Edinburgh, and he has confirmed that he is standing in the seat of Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, one of the new boundary changes, one of the new seats there. This is interesting because the MP who was hoping to stand, the candidate hoping to stand in that area, was David Duguid. He has been in that seat since 2017. He has had serious health complications, has been in intensive care, has been in hospital for a number of weeks, we understand, with spinal issues. And he issued a statement last night saying that he was hoping to stand, but he had been blocked by the Conservative Party. Now, that is really awkward. There had been speculation swirling around about whether Douglas Ross, whose previous constituency formed part of this new one, would he stand? Well, we have that confirmation now, and he said he's ready to take this fight to the SNP, but he will be facing accusations of backstabbing here, and what discussions really have been happening behind closed doors about Douglas Ross plotting to sit in this seat, all the while David Duguid has been in hospital. We haven't got a straight answer quite yet, and we are hoping to get that very shortly, around whether Douglas Ross has actually had a conversation with David Duguid, but this is difficult for the Conservative Party. Douglas Ross was trying to strike a pretty sombre tone. He said he didn't see himself being in this situation, given he's U-turned on his pledge not to stand at this general election. So let's see what he's got to say to try and defend himself. He's doing an interview with Sky News right now, and we'll bring that to you as soon as we have it. But yes, a U-turn. Douglas Ross is standing in this election.
And here's the full list of candidates for Aberdeenshire North and also Moray. Here we go, Moray East.
Thank you.
I should say. Connor being very polite and saying thank you. Man of the Moment's joined us. You've got a big shout out this morning.
Oh, I saw that.
Did you? Ed Conway, your figures.
Went down quite well.
Yeah, tell us about your figures.
I'm a bit sweaty. I just cycled in. Well, so you know, we had the Conservative numbers, the £2,000 figure yesterday, and so. The way this stuff is worked out is quite back of envelope, you know, and I just wanted to show that if you do the same kind of exercise on various different things, like, for instance, how much taxes have gone up in the last kind of 4 or 5 years, or indeed how much taxes are going to go up in the next 4 or 5 years, then you end up with quite big numbers as well. And so it's worth just underlining, first, this stuff is not super scientific. Second, actually, taxes have gone up quite a lot in the last Parliament, and indeed a forecast to go up a lot in the next Parliament. And therefore, it's not quite, you know, the one-sided story that the Conservatives might have you believe. Actually, they've been raising taxes as well. So that's the thing. But they don't... Well, the awkward thing is, first of all, they obviously don't like talking about that, as you discovered earlier on. But secondly, I do kind of get the suspicion that they don't mind as long as people are still referring to the £2,000 thing. You know, that's the...
Is it fair to refer to that?
Well, you know, maybe with provisos, and as long as you say But by the same token, the Conservative plans involve raising taxes in the coming years as well, and they've raised taxes a lot in previous years.
But you know what? You heard what he said, why that was, of course, because of the pandemic and also because of what happened in Ukraine. Does he not have a point?
Which is fair enough. No, he does have a point, but we don't know what the kind of counterfactual would have been. And we just do know that everyone in the country is experiencing much higher taxes. Yes, government spending is a lot as well, but they're facing much higher taxes, and that's something that we need to talk about. The tax burden is significantly higher now than it was before. Yes, there are big provisos about what happened in the meantime, but nonetheless, this is everyone's lived experience. It's not just data. I deal with data. But there's everyone's experience out there. We are all paying higher taxes, and it's not clear that the tax burden is actually going to go down in the coming years. And we need to remind people of that. The overall picture is still very tough for millions of households out there, and that hasn't gone away or anything, even though inflation is a bit lower now.
And self-tax was something that we were talking about as well, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. So the difficulty is that the Conservative Party don't really want to talk about their record, as you say, right? They don't want to talk about their record in government, because if you start to draw attention or shine a light on the record, you start to realise that they haven't delivered on some of the promises that they made. And therefore, they want to talk about hypotheticals, so the future, where they can try and argue that Labour's going to put your taxes up. So in the debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, we heard Sunak say again and again and again, Starmer only wants to look at the past, we are the party that looks to the future. And you can understand why he might say that, but you can also understand, nonetheless, that actually it's quite convenient for the Conservatives not to look into the past, because the past 14 years, they've been in power. And as you rightly say, Kay, the stealth taxes, the fiscal drag, has meant that people are actually paying an incredible amount of tax historically under a party that claims to be a low-tax Conservative Party, and that's quite a difficult sell to make. And interestingly, we've just had some new YouGov data come out in the past few minutes.
Oh, have we?
Yeah, saying actually... So talking about how people feel what things have got better and what things have got worse. So YouGov have done this poll, and they say 85% of people say the cost of living has got worse. 84% say the NHS has got worse. 78% say immigration's got worse. Economy, 78%. Housing, 72%. So the problem is you've got these really big electoral...
And they're right about basically all of those numbers, aren't they?
There you go.
Yeah, did you say cost of living gone up 20%?
20% since the kind of early, over the last kind of 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that people notice. It's not the 2% in the last year. It's the fact that we are all paying a fifth more, when you go to the shops, when you look at your bills, paying a fifth more than we were in quite recent memory. That's the issue, I think, that people are still struggling with.
What else is going to catch your eye over the next few weeks?
Well, I mean, OK, so we're going to look out for more silly numbers, because some of these numbers are quite silly, frankly. But also, we've got the manifestos. And so some of this speculation, and it's all just speculation right now, is going to come to an end. Monday, I think we're going to hear about the Lib Dems. We've got the Conservatives and Labour coming up later after that. And so that's going to be the interesting thing. And also, how many actual numbers do we get in there? We'll be going through all of that, and that's when things actually get interesting, because we're finding out what they're going to potentially do.
The thing with the tax, we've talked time again on this programme, is polling shows that people are prepared to stand paying more tax if the public services work. And that's the circle that both parties have to try and square, isn't it?
Improving public services is more popular than tax cuts, even though the Conservatives are trying to focus on tax cuts as kind of one of their key pillars of the election battleground. But that's partly, one would argue, because they are trying to appeal to a specific section, a cohort of voters, their core base, rather than trying to cross over.
And as we pour over this, we're just seeing Prince William arriving, I think, with Justin Trudeau. Alistair?
Yes, indeed. The Prince of Wales is representing the King at the Canadian Memorial here at Juno Beach, also representing Canada is the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and he will get the chance to witness a similar event that we have been seeing begin at the other beaches and all along the coastline. Different nations are reflecting on and marking their incredible losses. For the Prince of Wales, he has travelled across and will have plenty of thoughts in his own mind about the past, and represents another generation learning about the cost of war, which is, of course, part of all this that we witness. And for the Prince of Wales too, doubtless passing on to the Prime Minister of Canada very warm messages from the King and Queen.
bugler tonight, don't play the call to arms.
It is close to 10 o'clock. I'm going to pick up now from the breakfast team at Sky News Today with Wilfred Frost, and Alistair Bruce is still standing by for us. And Alistair, just remind us there why we are seeing the Prince of Wales and the King at different memorial remembrance events, and is that always the case on these anniversaries, as opposed to all of the nations coming together at the same time in the same place?
Well, there were different beaches, and it was always the case that when the King was himself Prince of Wales and the Queen had gone to play her part at the British events, that the then Prince of Wales, now our King, would go to join the Canadians. But of course, later on today, all the heads of state will gather at the Normandy American Cemetery, which is over to the west from here. And there the Prince of Wales will represent the King. The King, of course, who has recently been suffering from cancer diagnosis, will not be attending that mass gathering. And also going with the Prince of Wales will be the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in order that there can be a meeting afterwards of heads of government and heads of state to look at the current challenges to Europe with the war going on in Ukraine.
Canadian event at the moment where the Prince of Wales is attending. In just a moment, we'll pivot to where His Majesty the King is. And what are we going to be listening to when the King does start his speech?
Well, the King will want to express, as he did yesterday in Portsmouth, the immense debt of gratitude, and will, in his own way, encompass quite what a sacrifice was represented by that generation in order that freedom was maintained both in the United Kingdom and in what was then the British Empire. And I think that after that, the thoughts will pivot very strongly to the act of remembrance, where an exhortation will be made by one of the veterans, that famous saying, "They shall grow not old as we who are left grow old." And then it will go on into the last post 2-minute silence for Ravalli and the dedication. And that will be, I think, the great focus for all of us of what in itself is the purpose of this event. So the Prime Minister now leading the Prince of Wales into the event here at Juno Beach and the Canadian War Memorial there.
And Alistair, I was going to just ask, in terms of these warm relations that we're seeing between Trudeau and the Prince of Wales, and of course we've already seen some very warm pictures of the King and President Macron, who have a great affinity for each other, that we've seen in recent times, whether it's been on state visits or on other anniversaries.
Well, definitely, and I think on this occasion, with all these anniversaries of D-Day, it is exceptional to make sure that they do keep those warm relations going, and it is to reflect upon what was an enormous international achievement back then in 1944. But it was achieved, and the Nazis were pushed back, and the start of the battle to free Europe had begun. And it could only have begun once the Canadians, the French resistance, the United Kingdom's armed forces, everyone had come together. So this was the President of France arriving a few minutes ago, being received by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the British ambassador to France. And they were then led into the events taking place. These are the latest pics that we've got. The pictures came in a little earlier on of the Prime Minister having a good chat with Mrs. Macron. And Mena Rawlings, the British ambassador, who perhaps was the host of the King last night in Paris at the British ambassador's residence, and being received by the principal French dignitaries and those from the United Kingdom who played a part in preparing this event. And as you were saying, it is very much an event where allies, reflecting the closeness that took place in the background to ensure that Operation Overlord was the success it turned out to be, are meeting together in the same bon ami and good intent. And what great weather they've got for it too.
Great weather on this day, 80 years on from the original momentous day that is being commemorated when, of course, the weather was not quite so good, but just good enough that the vast majority of the crossings were successful. And events have been taking place across both France and the UK to mark the Allied invasion and the Normandy landings 8 decades ago. As we do await His Majesty the King's speech, expected any moment now, we can look at some other pictures of events from this morning. We saw at dawn crowds gather at the shoreline in the same spot where so many had faced their fate on the 6th of June 1944. US Navy SEALs came out of the water onto the shores of Normandy in a reenactment of the events 80 years ago. Impossible, of course, to truly reenact those events. Planes flew overhead as well. Again, all of this taking place shortly after dawn this morning. 6 parachutists landed on the beach. And a lone military piper began the formal commemorations, playing a lament at sea, marking the first moment that UK soldiers landed on the shores of Gold Beach 80 years ago. The Royal Marines then waded themselves into the shoreline. And we should just mention as well that we're going to have a special event this evening, which you should stay tuned for, not just during the live events, but at 8 p.m. tonight. And Alistair, we are awaiting at the moment the King to give his address that is expected in a little moment, running just fractionally behind. You mentioned the great weather today, Alistair. Talk us through what the weather was like today, 80 years ago, and what those heroic soldiers were having to deal with on the crossing. It almost was called off.
An Atlantic storm was still coming in, and it had nearly delayed, well, it had delayed the landings by 1 day, but they couldn't afford to let it go on any longer because otherwise there would have been moonlight and that would have lit up and taken away some of the surprise. So, yes, the weather is very different today on the coast of Normandy. And it's wonderful that it should be so, because with the veterans, the age they are, most of them are very close to or near the age of 100. And so keeping them warm and keeping them part of the warm welcome that France has provided was very, very important. And very shortly, the King will be making his comments from Vers-sur-Mer, and that will be the highlight for the United Kingdom's reflections today. And it will also precede the very traditional last post, 2-minute silence, and the Reveille. And of course, then the dedication that follows.